Um, we're gonna have a big group today. I think this is the first meeting we've had for almost everyone on, so exciting. So thank you everyone for joining. And let's get your cameras on. Um, and get started. And I think Nicole is also trying to join as well. So if you could please promote Nicole. Wait to make sure she's on there. So I'll just give you, there's Nicole. And I think everyone that's supposed to be here is here. So we'll get started. Welcome to the December 14th, 2022 board meeting. My name is Sung Oh, president of the board. Before we convene, I'd like to remind everyone present that the board is a consumer protection agency charged with administering and enforcing pharmacy law. Where protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. This meeting is being conducted consistent with the provisions of Government Code Section 11133. Participants watching the webcast will only be able to observe the meeting. Anyone interested in participating in the meeting must join the WebEx meeting. Information and instructions are posted on our website. As I facilitate this meeting, I will announce when we are accepting public comment. I have advised the meeting moderator to allot 3 minutes to each individual providing comments. This approach is necessary to facilitate this meeting. Before we get started, I would like to ask staff moderating the meeting to provide general instructions. Moderator?
This is the moderator. Each time the board requests or opens up for public comment, we will be opening up the Q&A feature and displaying the instructions are on the screen. And to access the Q&A, you simply go to the question mark inside of the square, which is typically located bottom right corner of your WebEx screen. And in the text field that appears, type comment, or I would like to make a comment, and make sure that gets sent to all panelists. And once you are called on, I will unmute your microphone and you will click the unmute me button from your side to unmute your microphone, I apologize. If you're calling in, you press *3 to raise your virtual hand and we will unmute you from our end. And that is the instructions. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And now I'd like to take a roll call to establish a quorum. Maria Serpa.
Licensee member present.
Good morning, Maria. Jig Patel.
Present, licensee member.
Good morning, Jig. Renee Barker.
Aye, present, licensee member.
Good morning, Renee. Indira Cameron Becks.
A public member present.
Good morning, Indira. Trevor Chandler.
Public member present.
Good morning, Trevor. Jesse Crowley.
Licensee member present.
Good morning, Jesse. Jose De La Paz.
Public member present.
Good morning, Jose. KK Jaw.
Licensee member present. Good morning.
Good morning, KK. Kula is joining us in about 2 hours, I believe. And Ricardo, unfortunately, is not here today. We'll miss him. Nicole Tebow.
Licensee member present.
Good morning, Nicole. Jason Wise.
Public member, and it's good to be back, Mr. President.
Good morning, Jason. Yes, we missed you. And then I am here. All right, the quorum has been established. Ask everyone participating today to be respectful of the work before the board today. We encourage participation by members of the public throughout our meetings at appropriate times. The board respectfully requests that when the comments are provided, they are done so in a professional manner consistent with how the board conducts its business. I will now ask the moderator to open the line for individuals to provide the opportunity to provide public comment. Sorry, Elizabeth, slide 2, I think agenda item 2. Public comments on items not on the agenda or agenda items for future meetings. You're not required to identify yourself, but may do so. As we open the lines, I would like to remind everyone that the board cannot take action on these items except to decide whether to place an item on a future agenda. Members, following review of the public comments for this agenda item, I'll ask members to comment on what, if any, items should be placed on a future agenda. As a reminder, this agenda item is not intended to be a discussion, rather an opportunity for members of the board and members of the public to request consideration of an item for future placement on an agenda, at which time discussion may occur. Moderator, please open the line for public comment.
Yes, this is the moderator. The Q&A feature is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you are logged in WebEx, you can click the question mark inside of the square, typically bottom right corner of your WebEx screen. And in the text field, type in comment and make sure that goes to all panelists. You can also raise your hand by hovering your cursor or mouse over your name, the participants panel, and an outline of a hand will appear. Click on that outline to raise your virtual hand. If you called in, press *3 to raise your hand, and we will unmute you from our end. And I see a hand just went down. There you go. And just confirming, is there any DCA headquarters or any remote locations? That's a no, correct?
Elizabeth, there's a call-in user that raised a hand.
Yes, thank you.
That is correct. There is no DCA or in-person location.
Thank you for confirming that. Call-in user, or I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone and 3 minutes, and you'll get a 30-second warning. Unmuted.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Terrific. I'm glad you can hear me. This is Peggy Binzer. I am the Executive Director and General Counsel of the Alliance for Quality Improvement in Patient Safety. We are the professional associations for patient safety organizations and their healthcare providers. And I would like to have the Professional Association for PSOs provide a presentation to the board on the provisions of the Patient Safety and Quality Improvement Act, and also share the great work that the California Community Pharmacy PSOs are doing.
Thank you for the comment, Peggy.
Thank you.
This is the moderator. I see no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, with that, members, any thoughts or comments? Okay, moving on. So moving on to agenda. Go ahead,
Sorry.
Maria.
I was waiting for someone else to speak up. Yeah. I'd like to hear a little bit of discussion maybe from yourself or Nicole regarding the Med Safety Committee and whether that presentation would be appropriate there, or has it already been done?
We have something coming up later in the day, so I think we might just see how that goes. And I think that we can definitely consider more presentation as we go through our meeting today and see how everything goes. Is that good, Maria?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Any other comments? All right, moving on to the agenda item 3, recognition and celebration of pharmacist license in California for 40 years. Members, as you may recall, several years ago, the board changed its recognition program for pharmacists and currently recognizes pharmacists that have been licensed for 40 or more years. Recognition of pharmacists reaching this milestone is posted on our website, and pharmacists are provided with a certificate. Prior to transitioning to remote meetings, the board routinely provided an opportunity for pharmacists licensed for 40 years to attend a board meeting and be recognized by the board. Although we have returned to remote meetings, I'd like to provide an opportunity for the board to recognize pharmacists that have been licensed in California for 40 years. Moderator, I'd like to ask that you open up the Q&A feature to allow pharmacists attending today that would like to be recognized by the board for 40 years of service as a California licensed pharmacist. To see if anyone is here today that's been a pharmacist for 40 years or more.
This is the moderator. The Q&A feature is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. Again, you can click the question mark inside of the square, type comment, send it to all panelists. Hover your cursor or mouse over your name on the participant panel and click on the outline of a hand. If you're calling in, it's *3 to raise your hand. I see no request for public comment. Would you like to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. Even though they're not here today, but congratulations to everyone who has been licensed as a pharmacist for over 40 years, and everyone who's been a licensed pharmacist and technicians, and every licensee that the board licenses. Thank you for all your contributions to public health and all your hard work. Moving on to agenda item 4, presentation by Institute for Safe Medication Practices of Medication Error Reporting members. I'd like to welcome Dr. Rita Ju to provide a presentation on medication error reporting. As we begin, I'd like to thank Dr. Ju for the support and education ISMP provides to healthcare providers. Dr. Ju, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for coming on such short notice.
Good morning, Board Chair O and the board members. Actually, can I have the ability to share my slides if possible?
Hello, good morning, Dr. Ju. I'm working on trying to give you the presenter role. Elizabeth, I might need your assistance on this.
Well, if not, if you wanted to share the slides, I can just, there you go. Yeah, it might save us some time. And again,
Okay,
thank you. Thanks. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you all on the ISMP medication error reporting program and how we have used the information to improve medication and patient safety in the last almost 30 years. Next slide, please.
And I gave you the presenter role. I can take it back, but the presenter role is yours.
Okay.
And on top of the slides, you have the arrows and you.
Can y'all see my slide now? You can all see my slide, right?
Yes, we can see them.
Perfect. Okay, so advance my slide. Okay, so just to set the stage, this is the website, the ISMP website, and here you can see there is the button for the error reporting program. And we operate 3 different error reporting programs. One, a general medication error reporting program where just about any drugs medication errors is reported through this program. We also actually, back quite a few years ago, in conjunction with the Department of Health in San Diego, started the vaccine error reporting program. And that is actually a very robust program, especially during the time once after COVID has started with all the vaccine, COVID vaccine errors that has come through this program. And lastly, we also operate a consumer medication error reporting program where consumers will come in and let us know what some of the errors that they have experienced. And what we do with our programs, the report is once the report comes through to us, we investigate and determine the cost and severity. We try to share the information with the community, but the most important part that I wanted to highlight on is the prevention. Here's where we interact with the FDA and the USP, United States Pharmacopoeia, to influence regulatory change. We also work directly with manufacturers, standard organizations, professional and trade organizations, and the healthcare community in general to try to affect any changes that needs to happen. So this is a list of the agencies that we work with directly to try to impact our changes. Obviously, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the United States Pharmacopoeia, as I've said, alluded to earlier, the Joint Commission, the National Coordinating Council for Medication Error Reporting and Prevention, National Patient Safety Collaborative, and we also work directly with the medical product industry to try to influence these changes. So first off, some of the highlights of what we have been able to accomplish with the various agencies. The first one is the FDA, the US FDA. Early on in the 90s, because of a lot of lookalike drug names confusion, we have influenced the FDA to try to implement what we have started the naming of tall man lettering, or the more recent terminology for this is the mixed case lettering. And FDA has adopted a list of lookalike drug names that they are asking manufacturers to use these tall man lettering in their labeling to try to help differentiate these drug names. From a lot of errors on drug errors that are happening, and we see that could be influenced by reduced by the barcoding technology, that some studies have shown that it was moving to the positive direction. But the biggest issue was that a lot of products, pharmaceutical products, still at that time did not have barcode as one of the features on their labels. And so we've worked very closely with the FDA to try to then allow for the FDA to come up with a barcoding rule that actually helps now these days in preventing a lot of drug errors that's due to mixed up of one drug versus the other. And vincristine in the mini bag is one initiative that we have worked on for years. I mean, for the longest time, we have seen really detrimental reports, such as the ones that I've listed, the newspaper clipping that I showed you on the right-hand side of the screen, where unfortunately vincristine was inadvertently injected intrathecally into patients instead of intravenously, and causing very painful deaths. And from that, we have learned that the biggest reason for that mix-up is because all of the drugs that vincristine was put in a syringe in the same manner that a few intrathecal medications were also intended to be given around the same time for the same chemotherapy protocol. And so we have been advocating for a long time that these vincristine should be prepared in a mini bag so that it can be differentiated from the syringes for intrathecal administration. And we have successfully, back early this year, have the FDA change their labeling for all vinca alkaloids to reflect the fact that it should not be prepared in a syringe, rather it should be prepared in an intravenous infusion bag to try to prevent errors from happening. And I'm happy to report to the board that since institutions that have switched to the mini bags, they have not been seeing the same errors that was happening, and the death from intrathecal vincristine in administration is a really painful death neurologically. So this is one huge step to improving this patient safety in all administration of all vinca alkaloids. And finally, earlier this year, the FDA has issued a guidance statement on safety considerations for container labels and carton labeling designed to minimize medication errors. And a lot of the contents within this guidance is through the error reports that we have presented to the FDA in our monthly meeting, telling them what some of the main issues are and our recommendations of how the labeling should look like. And then these recommendations were adopted in the FDA guidance statements. I just also wanted to show you a couple of things that is some really quick turnaround in advising the public about, or the healthcare providers about medication error issues. The most recent ones is Paxlovid, for example. We have been reporting a lot of errors, medication errors regarding Paxlovid, whether it's the packaging and the drug interactions, the dosing and all, to the FDA. And together with Pfizer, FDA has approved this prescribing and dispensing information, mainly focusing on how to minimize wrong dose medication errors and really revising their fact sheets to improve patient safety. So this is where the robustness of the medication error reporting program can help inform and educate folks on some of the immediate dangers that where you cannot make a quick change. And the other most recent one is this issue with compatibility with prefilled glass syringes connectors. And this is literally something that we have just brought up to the FDA a few months ago. And the FDA alert came out in the late November to try to warn everyone about the safety issues. As with the United States Pharmacopoeia, our main influence is on General Chapter 7, which is on labeling. And you can see in here on your left-hand side of the right-hand side, sorry, of the screen, a list of accomplishments we have influenced. The first and foremost is actually the use of metrics units. Those of us who have been around for a little while have been educated about the apothecary systems. And that was when early on practice that we all try to use and try to remember what these metric systems means, the drams, the drupals, and all the grains. That confuses a lot of people. We received a lot of errors with these apothecary units that has influenced the USP to basically cease officially recognizing apothecary system as on the labeling and requiring that drug strains be expressed in the metric system in the containers. Then other errors that we have been gotten reports of with leading and terminal zeros or abbreviations, dangerous abbreviations such as units. These are all items that are now listed in the USP Chapter 7 labeling section where there needs to be leading zero and there shouldn't be terminal zeros, and units should be spelled out are all the influence from these errors that has informed what the best practice needs to be. Quantity and total volume expression is another one where we have seen quantities when a concentration is listed on a vial. There has been providers that has mistaken that as that total amount. So if you say 100 milligrams per ml, if there is a 10 ml vial, there are some providers that have mistaken that as 100 milligrams in the entire vial and administer the entire 10 ml to patients. So the USP standard right now is to list the total quantity and total volume first with the concentration in the bottom. And this again has been a result of us advising them of some of the errors that has been happening. One that we have applauded a lot on is the ratio expressions that is confusing, and epinephrine is a huge one, where now the USP has ceased recognizing ratio as one on the labeling as a strain, and it all has to be in milligrams per ml to prevent confusions in dosing errors. The other two, like the high alert medications, like the concentrated potassium chloride and neuromuscular blockers, labeling has been strengthened to warn folks about the fact that this is high alert medications. For example, with the neuromuscular blockers, now they are mandated to put in a warning that says this is a paralyzing agent, and potassium chloride has warning about the fact that it is concentrated potassium chloride to try to make sure that folks, it draws the eyes of folks so then it won't be mistaken at other drugs. And its expiration date is our latest contribution to that. There's a lot of different manufacturers will express their expiration date in different manners, that the month and the year, the date could easily be confused, and sometimes even the years. When you say 22 to 22 could be a date, right? So now as of September 1st, 2023, there is a standard format of year, date, month, and date that the manufacturer has to be adhering to when they're expressing expiration date. And again, were all informed by the errors that we have seen on expiration dating that folks got confused with. Well, as far as the Joint Commission goes, definitely those of us who's been around for a little while will remember the Rule of 6 for pediatric IV infusions. And the Joint Commission, because of all the errors with concentrations of IV infusions, that the Joint Commission has come out and mandate the elimination of the rule of six and mandating standardized concentration based on the errors that have been reported to the through ISMP. And other things, other items such as the list of unsafe or do not use medical abbreviations. Again, the tall man lettering is something that the Joint Commission has endorsed. And our biggest win that we have talked a lot about is the storage restrictions of concentrated potassium chloride and ultimately concentrated electrolytes that should not be stored in the nursing units have dramatically reduced the medication errors and the death that was associated with concentrated potassium chloride that was mistakenly infused to patients as a regular IV fluid or other medications that we have been getting so many of those errors reported to us previously. And I'm happy to tell you that since the Joint Commission has put in that rules in the hospitals, we have only received one error that was medication errors related to concentrated potassium chloride, and that was really the whole Swiss cheese effect that was happening. And finally, the list of high alert medications and the Joint Commission requiring special handling of these high alert medications was in place because of all these errors were reported to us. This is just a screenshot to show you how in the past the potassium chloride looks so much alike as the sterile water or sodium chloride that has killed patients in the past. And now with this must be diluted warning and the fact that it has been removed from the patient care unit has dramatically saved lives in patients. And this was just on the right-hand side was just the Sentinel event alert that the Joint Commission has put out initially and eventually make it a national patient safety goal. Other errors that we've received quite a bit is the mixed up of the connectors, the connecting tubings where enteral medications of feeding was inadvertently administered to patient intravenously and cause definitely severe harm, if not death, to patients. And ISMP has used these information to advocate for now the ANFIT connectors that would not be able to connect to IV tubings, and also the NRFIT, which is the neuroaxial connectors that will prevent connection of intrathecal medications or epidural medications into the vein. So this is again informed by errors that has been reported to ISMP and hence the changes in the practice. Now, when it comes to manufacturers, I do wanted to say that there are definitely a lot of influence we can have with these errors reported through these programs that we can also inform the manufacturers to make changes. Tylenol is a great example. We have a series of communications and issues with medication errors that we reported to the manufacturer. You can see in here, there was recalls because of confusing labels. There was removal of bulk bottles altogether from the market because of errors reported. And very finally, today, you would only see the 160 milligrams per ml acetaminophen on the market and no longer the concentrated drops because of the mix up in the concentration and overdoses that has happened. And again, these are the results of errors reported that eventually lead to changes from even in the manufacturing world. And lastly, I just want to show you a labeling change. We have had reports that although the names look very different up on the top with Prolia and UDENYCA, we have had numerous reports of mix-up because they're stored in the refrigerator in the same pharmacy, because these are usually used in infusion pharmacies. They look alike in the packaging. And by informing the manufacturer about that, they have since make a change in in the packaging to help differentiate the errors, and we have not received any additional reports of errors from these confusion of these two drugs. So that concludes my presentation. If I can entertain any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Ju. Members, any questions for Dr. Ju? Please raise your hand or go ahead and just speak up and unmute. Go ahead, Jesse.
Thank you so much for this presentation. Actually, I did have a question about packaging, so I'm glad that you brought it up on the last slide, because in a retail setting, I noticed that manufacturers often use the same bottle, packages, and labels for different medications. And I don't often see that on med error reporting forms in actual pharmacies. So I'm curious if ISMP is working on some work to try to change it so that manufacturers can't make different medications the exact same bottle and label and colors.
Right.
Yeah,
So
I'd like to know if you have data on that sort of mix up.
we absolutely, all the time, just about every week we get error reports, or at least sometimes people will report hazardous conditions to us where errors might not have happened yet. We definitely have seen, unfortunately, with a lot of generic companies, they like to have that whole line of their product looking exactly the same, and that's where there's confusion in medications. We have seen it in injectable medications. We have definitely seen it in both bottles that is dispensed in the outpatient basis. We always go back to the manufacturer to advise them, and we also always send back the information to the FDA. And this is the area, unfortunately, in the retail side of the pharmacy, there is not as robust of a way to try to impact a change as we could have in the acute care setting, because of a lot of the accreditation and regulatory agencies that actually we can partner with to try to influence a change. And I do believe that that is a huge reason why we were so successful in impacting a lot of the changes based on the errors that were reported to us, is partly associated with the fact that there are more regulatory requirements in the acute care space. So that actually has helped improve the patient safety in the hospitals and health systems. What we don't have as robust of a system is in the community pharmacies, where we can impact an even bigger change, because more and more medications are coming out that are not benign when patients are taking from home. There's chemotherapy that is being provided to patients. We have just gotten a report where there was a mixed up between an anticoagulant that the patient should be receiving with methotrexate, and the patient was actually receiving methotrexate for 3 months and not understanding why they was suffering symptoms from methotrexate side effects.
Well, thank you so much for all your work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jesse. Nicole?
Hey, thank you so much for the presentation. It's very informative. I just wanted to make a comment that it's really great to see that ISMP can take this data from these multiple organizations and then bring that together to facilitate change. Yes, you know, errors can be reported as a one-off, but I think you're congregating them together, aggregating them, and then being able to do that is what makes a change, especially when you're looking at something like the labeling, the Tylenol change, those sort of things that individually reporting errors would not be able to achieve. So just wanted to comment on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Maria?
Hi, thank you. Thanks for your presentation, Rita. Always excellent. I was hoping you could maybe spend a minute and educate us about ISMP's proactive work in your newsletters and your checklists that you send out to your subscribers. I've always found the checklist very helpful to make sure that my sites were practicing up to the safest standards. Can you share how ISMP does that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Maria. And so it really is once the biggest mission for ISMP is get these errors that are reported and then sharing this information. And we have been doing that through our newsletter for the last 20 plus years and highlighting what we've seen as safety gaps and making recommendations. And on a quarterly basis, we summarize all of these safety concerns into what we call an action agenda so that folks can start working through that. And most hospitals would use that action agenda to check off and see if they have the same safety gaps that they need to implement plans for and work through to proactively prevent errors from happening. And the beauty of a medication error reporting program is really to work on prevention rather than just to say, okay, so this happened. So what? Because we really do believe that if one error is reported to us, there's probably 10, 20 or more errors that has happened that was not reported to us. So by sharing these errors with folks and making them understand that there is potential hazards that they need to look at in their institution, they can then proactively evaluate the system and figure out what they needed to do to prevent these errors from happening.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Dr. Jujic. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ju, once again for the presentation, and it's amazing work that you're doing for patient safety there. I had a questions on error reporting. With the institutions that you're currently working with, do they send in near miss incidents at all?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And actually, those are the most valuable data. Before we hurt somebody, we can actually look at that and proactively prevent that from an error from happening. I'll give you a great example. For the longest time in the in the health systems and hospitals world, we would have bulk bottles of potassium chloride in glass that is used to prepare parenteral nutrition, for example. And we know that it is put in a glass container and differentiated from other IV bags. And so everything was good with that until the manufacturer have to come up with a bag, an IV bag, instead of a glass bottle of concentrated potassium chloride. I cannot, because the line for making glass bottles were discontinued. I cannot tell you how many reports we have gotten from hospitals telling us how dangerous this is and how scary it could be. And this, because the bag looks exactly like a regular IV bag. And if it's inadvertently brought up to the patient care unit, it could have been infused as an IV solution by mistake and kill somebody in no time. We have gotten, I would say, over 50 reports of these bags and the potential hazards, because folks are so used to sending us a lot about these near misses that they wanted to make sure that everyone knows about it. And they also wanted to make sure that we can help them come up with recommendations on how to avoid errors from happening. And we also work directly with the manufacturer to try to influence some changes so that it can be well differentiated from other IV bags so we can prevent errors from happening. And I'm happy to say that, and I would have to touch wood now, that no, we have not received any errors that was happening because of that, the new change in packaging, because we're proactively trying to do something to prevent that from happening.
Awesome. I had one other question. So after your evaluation process, and when you provide feedback to the institutions that are submitting these errors and near miss errors to you, how are they utilizing it? If you could just share some data with us on how they're implementing and using the data that you are providing back to them.
Well, depending on the errors, no, we don't, obviously, with the errors, the volume of errors that are reported to us, we don't always, I mean, if there is a request for our recommendations, we certainly provide that, but we don't usually provide individual recommendations. Our recommendations are usually provided in the forum of our newsletter, where we would talk about the case of what we would actually write up about what actually happens, and then we make recommendations of how everyone can safeguard the process, what they need to be doing to prevent these errors from happening. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, you have a lot of data, and I don't know if you play a role where you would look at a institution's policy on certain workflow processes, and you have a direct input on based on the data that you received, that you would say, hey, this is happening because in your policy, there's no scanning required at this step. And if you add that piece, then all of these errors could be prevented.
Yes,
so to speak.
We definitely provide that feedback to folks when there's a conversation directly with them about those errors. What we also do is we go out to perform consults for some of these organizations when they request for us to go in and do a consultation, and we'll provide a comprehensive recommendation of the areas that they would like us to look at and provide recommendations on. So that's more done on an individual consultation basis.
Great. And your institution has a lot of database, obviously, and error reporting is not the most fun part of any professional's job, but it's required to report. If you see a pattern of reduced incident reporting, do you have feedback on that as well? Institution, if you don't see any errors, let's say for a couple of weeks, because there's a consensus that X amount of near miss errors happens in institution every day, so to speak.
That's a great question. Because our system is a voluntary reporting system, we don't provide, and there is plenty of organizations that report errors to us, but there's also plenty that does not. So we don't provide that feedback. We do know who, from a database, who is reporting errors to us. But I can tell you one thing, though, is during COVID, a lot of organizations were saying that their own internal incident reporting has decreased, and yet ISMP reporting system has actually increased because of all the hazards that was there that folks wanted us to know about and provide guidance on, and spreading that to the rest of the healthcare community. So our reporting during COVID has actually dramatically increased rather than decreased.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jude. Thank you, Dr. Jude. Maria?
I just wanted to add to Dr. Jude's response for JIG to understand how the information comes back to the organizations, especially hospitals and healthcare. Many of our regulators take the information from ISMP and ask during their inspections, are you following national recommendations? And so this is a highly recognized national recommendation. And so if an institution is not following the ISMP standard, they typically get cited by the other regulators.
That is true. We always say we are non-regulatory agencies, but there's a lot of adoption of our guidelines and recommendations by the regulatory agencies.
I just had a follow-up comment on that. So, Maria, you said that the institution would get cited by the regulatory. So, does a PSO have authority to submit HIPAA to regulatory agency?
To regulatory agencies or to ISMP?
No, can ISMP report it to regulatory agency?
HIPAA? Oh, no, they don't do that. What happens is during the inspection, they have a checklist of things that they're looking for, like an inspector would have typically a checklist. And one of the things they look for are the high areas of potential patient safety. And in that list are the ISMP recommendations. So for example, if a healthcare system had concentrated potassium chloride on a nursing unit, they would get cited for that. There's no law or regulation against it, but the regulation states about following the national guidelines and recommendations. And so if you're not following the national guidelines and recommendations, you have to explain why.
I got you. Okay, so they don't have the access to aggregate data. Gotcha.
No, and definitely all the reports that are provided to ISMP are confidential. And the only time when we would disclose anything is if the reporter feels like they will agree for us to disclose where the error was happening or what who they are and all, but otherwise everything is confidential.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for the discussion. Any other comments before I open up for public comment? All right. Dr. Ju, as a public agency, the board provides opportunities for public comment on each item on the agenda. We will now be accepting public comments on the agenda item. Public comment is not question and answer time, although you are welcome to respond to any comments or questions, but you're not required to do so. Members, if you would like Dr. Ju to respond to any public comments, you can request such a response as well. Moderator, please open the line for public comment.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. Members of the public, if you are logged in to WebEx and would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square, typically located bottom right corner of your WebEx screen, and type comment in the text field that appears, and make sure that goes to all panelists before you hit that send button. You can also raise your hand by hovering your cursor or mouse over your name in the participants panel, and by clicking on the outline of a hand once it appears. For those who are calling in, you can raise your virtual hand by pressing *3. So now I'm going to send a request to unmute Stephen Gray's microphone. I'm going to set the timer to 3 minutes, and I'll give a 10-second warning. So Stephen, let me find your microphone. I sent a request to unmute your microphone.
Yes, can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say that ISMP is a great organization. It has saved many, many lives over many, many decades. And my compliments to the leadership, Michael Cohen, Donna Horn, and certainly now to Rita Ju. Having said that, I would suggest that perhaps the board needs to look at its proposal to decide if that is the type of organization that they're really looking for when they're trying to reduce the majority of errors that happen in a community pharmacy. As Dr. Ju pointed out, their work has been primarily with what she referred to as acute setting. For laypersons, that means the hospital versus a community retail pharmacy. Also, the ISMP has focused mostly on labeling and packaging. And that isn't necessarily where all of the errors or most of them come from in a community setting. I followed every single error for approximately 100 to 200 pharmacies for nearly 20 years in an organization and got every single one of them, and very few of them were related to the packaging and labeling by the manufacturer, although they were very serious when they did happen. I would suggest that the proposal be modified to say not list in statute ISMP if that's not what you're looking for to do. On the other hand, if you want pharmacies to report all errors, please realize that most of them are not going to be the types that ISMP has been focusing its work on. It may be better to say report all errors to an organization determined by the Board of Pharmacy. And then
this is Smiley. The public comment is getting ahead of himself somewhat to the next item. So that would be up to your discretion whether, to allow it. But we should be concentrating first on ISMP's proposal, not bleeding over to the statutory one, which is the next agenda item.
Yes, thank you. What I would suggest,
yeah.
what I would suggest about ISMP is you ask them about the types of errors they investigate. The reporting to ISMP is free form. It will not give you the level of detail to determine if an error is because of staffing or because of other issues that has been the focus of the Error Reduction Task Force. That data just isn't amenable, if it's free form, to getting that type of data and giving it back. So I would suggest you ask them about the free form and what they can gather from that. It usually means it has to be interpreted, re-entered into a system, and then give you quantitative and qualitative information, which is not usually facilitated by ISMP reporting. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment.
This is the moderator. No further requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Elizabeth. All right, Dr. Ju, did you want to say anything?
Well, I do, if you would allow me a minute to talk about the fact that we actually, while packaging and labeling is something that we focus on, we also have plenty of guidelines and recommendations that is not package, it's process focused. I do believe that our self-assessments for both community and the acute care setting is out, and it is all focusing, a lot of that is focusing on the process within the pharmacy space. And we do have also a community pharmacy newsletter, and also we have started to do a lot of work with the specialty pharmacies as well to try to prevent errors from happening in the specialty pharmacy space.
Thank you. We really appreciate you coming on such short notice. Thank you for the presentation, and I hope you can stick around a little bit. So hopefully you can be.
Sorry, this is Jessie. I just kind of had one more question for Dr. Ju after public comment. And I'm not sure if you can really answer this, but if I remember correctly, the ISMP was used, I think, in Canada at one point to take data about medication error reporting. And I'm just curious if you know if they just used the form that was on the ISMP website, or if there was a new form that was created specific to the kind of reporting and researching they were looking into.
Thanks for asking. Yes, and as a matter of fact, ISMP Canada is one of our sister organization, and I sit on their board. And they do have additional fields, and that's something. I think the ISMP reporting program is very different from any other programs that you may wanted to envision. We do have have worked with the Pennsylvania Authority, for example, on evaluating errors that are reported to them as well. And it's the reason for us having very simple fields is we want to encourage reporting, and we also will reach back out to the reporter for additional information as needed to try to understand the root cause of the problem. I think the program that we run currently is very different than what the board might be looking to try to get information from, and we have experience doing both. And it will definitely, your program, if it goes through, will definitely require additional fields to get more information in a global sense.
Thank you. Did you ever experience any difficulty with follow-up if you did have additional questions for the reporter? Or from the reporter?
Definitely. I mean, but most of the people who report to us are also very responsive, because I think there's a natural selection of the folks that are reporting to us, right? And in a program where the board is proposing, it will be a different kind of program where you do want it to try to solicit enough information in order to allow you to do the analysis that you will eventually need to do.
Thank you.
Thank you for the comment, Jesse, and thank you for the response, Dr. Ju. All right, so hopefully you can stick around for a little bit so you can listen to our discussion of where we will go on the next few agenda items.
Song, it's this Renee. I do have one question for Rita.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll just keep it brief. But so I'm just curious, since anybody can report to ISMP, I mean, have you only received submissions from health systems, or have you also received from community retail settings?
Absolutely. We received a lot of reports from the community and retail setting, as well as a lot of the consumer reports, errors that happened in the community settings, for sure. And there's a lot of vaccine errors that were reported to us that was reported through the community setting as well.
Mm-hmm. And then your process is the same then when those are received from whatever location?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Anyone else? All right, we're moving on. Thank you, Dr. Ju. Hopefully you can stay around for a little bit.
I will.
All right, moving on to agenda item 5 and 6, but 5 first, and I'm just gonna turn the meeting over to our chairperson, Nicole Thibault from the Medication Error Reduction and Workforce Ad Hoc Committee to lead our discussion on the next 2 agenda items on the discussion and consideration of statutory proposal to establish requirements for reporting medication error and discussion and consideration of statutory proposal related to working conditions. Chair Thibault, the floor is yours. If anyone needs to take a quick break, though, I will just, I understand we have a lot to go over today, but also we need to be mindful of needing to take a break. So, Chair Thibault, should we take a break?
I will default to the other board members.
Okay. Anyone needs a quick 10-minute break, please speak.
I would say let's take a break. I think this is going to be a long one.
Yes, that's probably a good idea. Sounds good. We'll come back at 10:10, 10:10, 10:10, everyone. Everyone is back. I'm going to take a quick roll call to make sure everyone is back before I hand it off to Nicole. Maria, are you back?
Here, thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Jig?
I'm here.
Thank you, Jig. Renee? Renee might not be back yet.
I am back. I am back.
Oh, hi, Renee.
Hi. Thanks.
Indira? I see you, Indira, but all right. Indira is back. I don't know if verbal.
Back.
Back. Thank you, Indira. Trevor?
Here.
Thank you, Trevor. Jesse?
I'm here.
Thank you, Jose.
I'm here.
Thank you, Jose. KK?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, KK. And Nicole?
Here.
Hi, Nicole. Jason? Didn't hear you, Jason, for some reason. Sorry. Just want to make sure.
I am here.
Thank you, Jason. And I am here. All righty. I am sending it back to you, Nicole.
Thank you, President O. On behalf of the committee, I am pleased to provide the board with a summary of the committee's efforts related to 2 specific agenda items. Thank you to my fellow members, Vice Chair O, Jesse Crowley, Kula Koenig, and Jig Patel. As I begin, I would like to remind everyone of the thoughtful manner in which the committee has approached these complex issues. The committee's initial meetings primarily focused on education of the issues of medication error and workforce challenges. The committee has received presentations from the Institute for Safe Medication Practices, the National Association of State Boards of Pharmacy on its Workforce Task Force report, the American Pharmacists Association on the Well-Being Index and Fundamental Responsibilities and Rights, as well as presentations by the Nova Scotia College of Pharmacists on the Nova Scotia Workplace Conditions Strategic Work. Beginning in September, the committee started evaluating policy issues to identify actions the boards can take to improve patient care and reduce medication errors consistent with the board's consumer protection mandate. So on to agenda item 5, the discussion and consideration of statutory proposal to establish requirements for reporting medication errors. Members, as part of the September and November committee meetings, members discussed medication error reporting and if the board should establish a mandatory reporting requirement. As indicated in the meeting materials, currently the reporting of medication errors is voluntary, and there are various sources that accept such reporting. The issue of medication errors is not new. A study referenced in prior meeting materials back from 2003 concluded that dispensing errors were a problem at a national level, with about 4 errors per day in a pharmacy filling 250 prescriptions. In addition, the New Hampshire State Board of Pharmacy reviewed medication errors it received between February 2007 and July 2012 and published its results that include 40% of errors involved dispensing the incorrect medication, and 68% of errors occurred when only one pharmacist was on duty. Limitations on the results included that the reporting of errors in New Hampshire was not mandatory. The practice of pharmacy has changed over the years. Such changes include pharmacies that may have integrated technology in the dispensing process and expanded authorization for pharmacists. More recent information published suggests that about 1.5% of all prescriptions in the community setting have a dispensing error. While that percentage sounds low, given the number of prescriptions dispensed in California, the estimated number of dispensing errors is staggering, well into the millions. As part of its assessment of this issue, the committee first undertook consideration of several policy questions, which are detailed in the meeting materials. As a committee, we reached general consensus that the board should establish a mandatory requirement to report medication errors. The committee also indicated the need for some anonymity if the board pursues such a requirement. As a committee, we agreed that the board should not mandate use of a specific form. However, the board should provide a template that could be used as a guideline for pharmacies. At the end of our first discussion, questions remained about who should receive the reports, the board or a third-party organization. The committee continued its discussion during the November meeting. The meeting materials provide summary information on different approaches taken to medication error reporting. In Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Patient Safety Authority was established as an independent state agency that collects reports of patient safety events from healthcare facilities. Reporting is mandatory under specified conditions, including incidents of harm or potential for harm. The statewide mandatory reporting became effective in 2004 for hospitals and other entities. However, the provisions do not apply to community pharmacies. In this example, it is a state agency receiving the reports. The reporting system includes confidentiality and whistleblower protections. Several entities were involved in the development and implementation of the reporting system, including ISMP. One of the primary outcomes of the system are quarterly publications. Another model reviewed by the committee is used in Canada, which is a collection of reported medication incidents submitted anonymously by community pharmacies for purposes of improving medication safety. The system, ISMP's Canada's National Incident Data Repository for Community Pharmacies, was developed in 2008. In 2010, Nova Scotia was the first jurisdiction to implement a requirement for community pharmacies to anonymously report medication incidents for quality improvement. Since that time, additional provinces have implemented mandatory reporting as well. Reporting to this system has contributed to improvements in practice through shared learning, medication safety and quality improvements, and as well as informing research and policy. As I will discuss in a moment, the committee's recommendation is similar to the Canadian model. The last reporting model considered by the committee was reporting to a patient safety organization referred to as PSOs. PSOs collect and analyze data voluntarily reported by healthcare providers. The Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, AHRQ, is responsible for regulating PSOs. Under the provisions of the federal law, there are a number of entities excluded from serving as a PSO, including a health insurance issuer, regulatory agencies, entities that carry out inspections or audits for a regulatory agency. There are several PSOs that appear to operate in California, which are reflected in the meeting materials. As I mentioned earlier, after considering the different approaches and the relevant policy questions, the committee is recommending that the board pursue a statutory proposal to establish a mandatory medication error reporting requirement. A copy of the draft language is included in the meeting materials. I want to quickly review the basic framework of the proposal. Specifically, as drafted, a community pharmacy would be required to report all medication errors to the Institute for Safe Medication Practices. Such reporting would need to occur no later than 14 days following discovery of the error. Under the proposal, the reports would be deemed confidential and not subject to discovery or subpoena or other disclosure as specified. The pharmacy would be required to maintain records demonstrating compliance. Further, the proposal would provide that a medication error report made would not be subject to discipline or other enforcement action by the board based solely on the report. As a committee, we determined that it is necessary for medication errors to be reported to a single entity and that ISMP, given its history and expertise, is the appropriate entity. I also wanted to mention here, I think that perhaps we weren't clear enough in one of our objectives based on some of the letters we received. Our intention is for one single entity to get the information, the error report, so that we can look at aggregate data across the whole state and then potentially use that to make changes. So I just want to highlight that our intention is for it to be a single entity for aggregate data, because I'm not sure that we were super clear about that before. So I apologize if that caused confusion for anyone. So before I open it up for discussion, would any of the committee members, is there any additional information from those meetings that you wanted to point out?
Hi, Nicole, this is Jig.
Hi, Jig.
I had some afterthoughts on the process, and I feel that like for our first commenter, was it Betty or Peggy? I think it was Peggy. She had brought up to have a presentation on, Patient Safety Act of 2005 to kind of get an overall picture on the processes. And the reason is, I think sending it to single entity like ISMP, and Steve Gray made some points or comments earlier about the level of experience with the community pharmacy, the forms that are used, and the format it's submitted, etc. I feel that we should understand PSA as a board, what the requirements are before we send this over to legislature. Just to make sure that none of the language, it supersedes any federal requirement. And, so that the language that we are sending to legislature, it's appropriate. And yeah, it's not sent back, basically.
Sure. Thank you, Jig. I do believe that this has already been reviewed by council, but Eileen, can you comment on that?
Hi, this is Eileen Smiley, Board Counsel. We've looked at it generally, but not in excruciating detail at this point, just because of timing considerations. But we'd have to wait and see what some of the public comments are. I don't think it would run afoul of federal law, which generally allows voluntary reporting, but we can wait and see what the public comments say as well.
Great, thank you. And then, did you have any other comments, Jig?
Oh, that's it. Thank you, Nicole, for giving me the opportunity to comment.
Great, thank you. And then Maria, I think I saw your hand next.
Yeah, thank you. I am very interested in, especially your comment regarding a single organization. And if ISMP is to be that single organization, what communications has the board had with them before we move on to statutory issues? Are there any contracts needed? Is there opportunity to add data fields like Dr. Ju mentioned, that we might want to add some data fields or some specific web link or form that would work for our state that would not be the typical international submission on that, but a special California type form?
Sure. Not to put you on the spot, but Anne, are you able to comment on that and what some of those conversations have been?
I think we can kind of talk in general terms and look at how ISMP has worked with the other organizations. So specific to Pennsylvania, ISMP worked with the Pennsylvania Authority, and as part of the process worked to develop what that reporting platform would be. So I believe that, yes, they do have experience there. And then as Dr. Ju indicated, with the Canadian ISMP, they developed their own reporting platform that is run through or funded through Health Canada. But yes, it is a more robust system, and I would anticipate that that would be required in California as well to meet the policy goals of the board in getting, some more robust information to allow for that shared learning and then the dissemination of the information more in line with how Canada is able to approach medication errors specifically for community pharmacy.
Thank you. Just to follow up then, I know that as this moves forward, there are going to be some language changes that we go through, of course, our own, but also through the legislature. I would suggest that as those details are fleshed out, that the actual legislation be more specific as to the ISMP something California site or something like that, so that we don't have people confused and actually using the wrong reporting avenue and think that they are meeting the intent when we are looking for a single database that contains all California information. But thank you.
That's a great point, Maria. Thank you so much. Jesse, I believe you had your hand raised next.
Yes, thank you. Just kind of highlighting again the importance, I think, in our goal as a committee to have all this information go to a single entity. I worry that if we have multiple organizations to report to, how we're actually going to be able to aggregate that data and whether that ultimately ends up being more work for the board because we have so many different PSOs reporting back their aggregated information. I think that's going to be more difficult to sift through and actually see the full picture. I think it makes much more sense to just keep it as that single entity. So just wanted to kind of highlight that again.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Yes, that's a really good point. And that's why I mentioned it as we were reviewing, because I don't know that we were totally clear about that to people, that really, yes, we want people reporting, that is part of it, but a huge piece of this is wanting to have that aggregate data so we can get the landscape of what's happening and then possibly use that to make changes going forward. I saw Trevor's hand and then I went down. So Trevor, just checking in. Are you good? Any questions?
Yes, I put my hand down because I wasn't sure if we were beyond committee comment and onto the general board comments. So
yeah, we just kind of went right over to it. So it's all good.
Got it. Yeah, I had a couple questions. First was just regarding the committee's work. What were the major deficiencies that the committee found of the multiple PSO reporting version? Was there any anecdotes, any examples of deficiencies of the multiple reporting aspect that led to the decision or the desire to move to one? And so that's my first question.
Sure. As Jesse mentioned, most of it was just around the ease and being able to get all the data in one format. I think that the worry was if we got all of this data in various formats, it wouldn't mean anything, or we couldn't get the larger meaning or larger data set from it.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Thanks. The second one is regarding the language in the committee recommendation, which I believe will be the motion versus the proposed addition, the actual amendment that's being proposed for legislature or for consideration by the Assembly and Senate. So in the committee recommendation, it uses the language to establishing a reporting requirement to an entity such as ISMP as proposed in the language, and in the amendment itself, it specifically says ISMP. So for whatever motion comes out of this to propose statutory language, are we being specific about ISMP, and should it be in the committee recommendation not an organization such as, but have it be the entity ISMP, or are we keeping it a little bit more vague to let the legislature do their process?
Our recommendation is specifically to use ISMP, but obviously the legislative process will still happen after this.
Yeah. Okay. My only thought process is if with the committee if it is the committee recommendation that ISMP is, that perhaps we take out the language of an entity such as ISMP, because it creates a little bit more vagueness around whether or not we're endorsing ISMP or an organization like it. So, but thank you.
Great. Thank you. That's a really, really great point. President O, I think you had your hand up next.
Thank you, Nicole. I just wanted to make a global statement why we originally, I think the original intention of this was just to, want to emphasize, what's going on in our pharmacies. And we are not trying to, this is not to be punitive. This is not to trying to, pick on anyone, just recognizing, as we discussed so much, of just culture, embracing and kind of understanding all of that, and trying to really understand what's going on in our pharmacies to be able to share information to prevent errors. For example, Moderna new bivalent vaccine, let's say a vial looks so similar, and then a lot of medication errors are being reported, and we can actually send an alert to all the pharmacies, watch out, please, take certain measures. So it's really to help and to prevent errors. This is in the embrace of just culture in a way, and to try to make sure that all the licenses are given information so that they can, take care of their patients. So just want to put it out there. This is a long process, as we all know. We're not legislatures, and so just this is many steps. We are not here to perfect the language of the proposal, and I think that if there's any amendments to be made, we could have a guardrails and some statements to the motion, not to try to make a specific language to try to change this proposal. So just want to put it out there, and welcome Kula. Hi, Kula.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. And thank you, President O. Yes, that's a wonderful reminder. And I think seeing the presentation by ISMP and knowing how large California is, how many prescriptions we dispense and pharmacies we have the chance to make a real difference, not just in our own state, but some of this information we're providing ISMP on such a large scale might help with things like, looking at the Tylenol change, those sorts of things that you won't know if just a single pharmacy is making their reports. But when you can aggregate it, we can make a change that positively impacts a number of patients. I know we're most concerned with our own state, but I could see this data helping other people as well. Renee, I think you had your hand up next.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you. Yeah, thanks everybody for all this good work for safety. I definitely think that the big advantage of aggregating the data is really how you see trends happening. So I would definitely, I think going in that direction. I'm just wondering, so it looks like currently there's, at least in the um, attachments here, there's a list of 8 different PSOs operated in California. And I see them, like real specifically to different retail organizations, companies. So I would assume that like having a requirement to report to ISMP does not preclude them from continuing to submit errors to these PSOs, correct? I would assume that they would want to be able to, sorry, I'm losing there it is. They would not want to, or they'd want to receive just what's happening within their own business. So both would continue, I'm assuming, correct? Is that correct? Or
Yes.
yeah. So okay. Yeah. So that was pretty much really what I wanted to just clarify. So thank you.
Yes, and that is a very good point. This would be an additional step, and we do recognize that. That's part of the reason why we chose a 14-day window instead of a shorter time frame, to give people time for that. So yes, other requirements around reporting will still exist. This is specifically meant to get the board that aggregate data, so that we can hopefully make large-scale interventions for patient safety and in real time as things are happening, much like President O's example about vaccines. So,
and then so for instance, ISMP would take California specific data, aggregate it for California, but also have the advantage of aggregating it for other like Pennsylvania that has. And anybody else who is reporting from like community, or just combine all of those, because some of them may apply to other settings. So I'm assuming that would feed into their total aggregate.
I would have to look to Dr. Zhu and the others. I think they would probably have to figure out the specifics, but the way that they use their data now, they definitely take learnings and then share them as part of their newsletters and other things. So I would imagine that is a possibility, but I'll definitely let them speak to that specifically.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks. Jason, I think you have a question as well.
Since there's concern about identifying just one organization as the recipient of all this data, was there discussion in committee as to just the uniformity of what information must be conveyed, even down to the point of data fields and whatnot? Did that seem unfeasible?
We haven't done that yet. I mean, we talked about some of the things that we would hope would be collected, but a lot of that will be done through the legislative process as far as deciding what specific things might have to be required or what parameters are there. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Anne, but that was my understanding.
Yeah, I think it could be done through legislation, or we could look at the legislation as the first step and then work with stakeholders through the regulation process to further define through regulation, to then use the regulation to execute, and then have greater flexibility to change the rules if necessary to meet the needs of stakeholders moving forward, and not have to always go through the legislative process. So I think there's a couple of different options.
Okay, because my one concern really is if you identify one organization as ISMP in this, that it does kind of lock up the process, and I don't want us to be in that situation.
Can you clarify by what you mean lock up the process? I'm sorry, I'm just not following.
That if the board is requiring that ISMP be the sole recipient of this data that conveys it back to the board, if there's any issues that come forward in the future with ISMP, then we'd have to change statute, and that's my concern.
Got it. I understand. Thank you. Anything else, Jason? No. Great. Jesse?
Yeah, just like a follow-up to that, I imagine having one single organization and having ISMP will give us more flexibility to specify exactly what parameters, whether or not it's actually written in the statute. versus if we're using multiple PSOs, I think that we could run into the situation where there are some forms that are more specific than others, and we may not ultimately get the data. I will say, I think it's good to have specific guidelines on what it is we're actually looking for, just based on what it is, the information that we're trying to get from this reporting. But yeah, just putting that all out there.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely, and we're just not there yet, I think, but I think we ultimately would want to specify what data we're getting. But I think that's a little farther along in the process. But yes, absolutely. Great point, Jesse. Jig.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment about what Trevor brought up. I think that we don't want to submit a confusing language, and that could create a conflict. And I feel that leaving it open would be a better idea. So any community pharmacy license pursuant to article shall report all medication error to a PSO instead of putting ISMP. I think that would remove the hurdle.
But do you would be fine with them doing so? Then you don't think it's important for it to be a single entity that it's reported to?
Well, we are still going to get what's needed is what are the root causes of each of these error, and that will prevent errors from happening. So as long as, because these PSOs, they work under the Patient Safety Act of 2005, all the regulations, federal regulation. So it is going to provide the institutions, anybody that's using retail or hospitals, and the whole process is going to improve. So at the end of the day, is it going to be better for consumers? Yes. So if it's aggregated in one place or it's coming from different PSOs, I think that what we are trying to get out of it we are going to still get the end result.
Sure.
But putting it on one could create conflict. That's all.
Sure. I guess my concern with doing it with the PSO is for organizations that don't use a PSO. So now where did they report it? So I think it's the same problem, but the opposite. For some of the smaller, maybe independent pharmacies who don't have, these organizational PSOs that they use. I know some pharmacies do use ISMP already in the community setting. So I think we're going to have the same potential issue there, maybe either way.
Yeah, it's going to be a major change. Independent would have their own way of logging all the errors, and not necessarily digital. It could be all paperwork at this point, and all of this would have to be somehow digitalized to bring it to one point. So it's going to be a hurdle. Let's say if it passes, how independent would take all of that and channel it digitally.
Right. And so I think that's, at least for me, that's part of my concern. We could end up with thousands of different data sets. And how do we make that into one usable form? So that's why I lean towards using one organization, because I know, at least in just looking at my own organization, when we're trying to compare data from our EHR and our pharmacy software, even just that one thing trying to match it in one organization gets messy. So I imagine if we're trying to aggregate millions of errors across thousands of different potential entities, it would very quickly become maybe impossible. So that is where my concern is in that. But again, maybe I'm not the best with data input, so maybe others know more than I do.
Yeah, no, I mean, just want to make sure that it goes to legislature. There's no conflict in the language, and it's not preempted by any federal regs. That's all. So
absolutely,
we don't want to send it in a very premature stage, and that's why I was talking about, let's bring another PSO. Let's understand the whole act that was passed in 2005, and get a broader picture, and then make a decision. That's all.
Definitely. I'm not at all opposed to having a presentation by the PSOs. I think that would be great in the med in our committee, maybe more so than to the whole board. Great.
And just go ahead and jump in. You're trying to say something, so I know.
Sorry, this is Anne. If I could just, sorry, for just a second. So I just want to highlight, so not an expert in this by any stretch of the imagination. I think that there could potentially be challenges with the board receiving information from the PSOs. I think that the PSOs would have to then report the information to a federal data bank, and that the state might be able to get the information there, but I do think that getting the information from the PSOs would probably be prohibited under the Patient Safety Act, as I understand it. Again, not an attorney, so let me just give all of those disclaimers, but I think that there could potentially be a problem with the board getting the data from the PSOs.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, very important point.
So ISMP is not a PSO? How are we getting the data from ISMP?
ISMP has they have a PSO arm with ECRI, as I understand it, but they also have their own independent non-PSO arm. So the presentation that was just provided by Dr. Ju earlier was specific to ISMP non-PSO, if that makes sense.
Okay. So there is a federal Patient Safety Act that has all the requirements of error reporting and all of that. But as a board, we don't want to go to a PSO. We rather go with an arm of a PSO.
We just go ahead, Anne.
I don't think that it's considered an arm of a PSO. Someone else would have to this is really legal and nuanced. So I'm not trying to be vague, Jig. I apologize.
No,
it's that they're different entities. I can't explain it very well. I don't know if someone else can, but they're different entities, and the Patient Safety Act has these firewalls built in on when information can and cannot be shared if there is commonalities between them. And so there's very specific provisions within the law on who can access. I can't remember what the acronym is, but the patient safety work product can't be shared if it's a common entity unless there are these certain conditions that are met, and then only certain people have access to it. So there's firewalls in it. So PSO people and non-PSO people firewall. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely confusing. And that's why, getting a whole picture on, patient safety, quality, PSQIA, I think it would be important for all the board members to know and understand, and for us to move forward. That's all.
Thank you, Jig. Trevor.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I clarify my comments regarding language, and that I'm, after having read the letters and listening to the conversation, I'm fully in support of having a uniform single entity that is bringing these together. And I wanted to make sure the language represented that. So I want to make sure that was there. Having listened to this, and always obviously us as a board erring on the side of the most effective way to protect Californians and patients of prescribers and pharmacists, and from a purely data perspective, I feel it makes the most sense to have a completely uniform repository for these entities. And so I support this. I appreciate the incredibly hard work that the committee put in identifying ISMP. And I think as with any legislative proposal, this is going to have a long ways to go, and it's going to take many forums, and it's going to come undoubtedly come back to the board to whether or not we're going to approve the amended version, because it's not going to look like what we are going to pass now, because that's just the nature of the legislative session. But just appreciate all your hard work, and that I will be supporting moving this forward so we can start the conversation as legislative session begins.
Thank you so much. And yes, you're right. This is going to be a long process. Jesse.
Hi, thanks again. So I did also want to point out that one of the concerns we had discussed in the committee meetings was that some of these patient safety organizations are affiliated with some of the chain pharmacies. And that's something that we kind of wanted to avoid, particularly when looking at the workforce survey results, where most of the burnout and pharmacists reporting that they don't have enough time for patient care are coming from the chain retail setting. And so we do feel like there's a little bit of a conflict, or I anyway view that, and I would want to avoid that using a PSO or leaving it open-ended when there's a potential conflict of interest with PSOs being affiliated with those specific chains.
Thank you, Jesse. Yes, that's a really good point. And I think that was part of what pushed us towards ISMP was some of that feedback on the workforce side that we heard from pharmacists. KK.
Hi, couple of questions. A, will we have more presentations just like the one we had for ISMP? And the other thing is, if we are going to the single window clearance, as we talked about, will we have any oversight on the aggregation of data methodology, kind of data that will be aggregated and how it will be presented to us?
Sure. I think we still have to work with ISMP or whomever we ends up being chosen around what the data will look like. At this point, since we don't have we're just proposing the regs, that's a little bit farther down the line, but I definitely appreciate and agree with you. That is something we would want out of this process.
And just to add, KK, yes, absolutely. We'll bring more presentations on PSOs as the meeting goes. I really just want to point out, it doesn't have to be one after the other. I know, we want things to be perfect, but I understand nothing will be perfect. So we have to process through the process to get process moving. And so we are absolutely, I will do my best to get a lot of presentations, not just at the Med-Era meeting as Chair Tebow can decide on that, but to the full board, as I believe this information will be very helpful for everyone. So I will do my best to bring this to the full board for presentations on it.
Great, thank you, President Au. Jesse, did you have another question or no?
Oh, no, sorry, I might have forgot to put my hand down.
No problem. There's just a lot of discussion. I want to make sure I don't miss anyone. Oh, and Renee.
So I just had kind of a quick question. I think I know the answer, but since aggregation is what gives us the sort of the best overview of error trends and things like that, I'm just wondering, so with these current PSOs, do they aggregate their information, like in total, all California PSOs?
I'm not sure of the answer to that. I'll open it up if anyone else knows, but at this point, we do not have access to that data. I know that piece of it.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to know, but I thought that's the way it was, but just clarifying because I'm still learning. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. No, I'm learning a ton about PSOs through this whole process and all of these. Yeah, so the one of the main points of this is the hope that we can come up with a mechanism where we can get the aggregate data, and that is not something that we have access to at this time. So, yeah. All right, members, any more questions? That was a great discussion. Thank you. All right. So with the committee's recommendations serving as the motion, moderator, please open the lines for public comments. As the moderator does so, I want to ensure members received copies of the written comments received by several organizations, including the letter from the California Retailers Association and National Association of Chain Drug Stores dated December 9th, the letter from UFCW, Western States Council, dated December 12th, I note that the letter from UFCW includes comments related to this agenda item and the next agenda item. And we also received the letter from the California Pharmacists Association yesterday evening.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate and you're logged in, click on the question mark inside of the square, typically located bottom right corner of your WebEx screen, and type comment in the text field that appears. And those who also logged in and would like to raise your hand, you can hover your cursor or mouse over your name in the participants panel and click on the outline of the hand that appears. Those who are calling in, press *3 to raise your hand. So we have a few requests for public comment. I'm going to be setting my timer to 3 minutes. You get a 10-second warning. And I'm going to start with Susan Bonilla. I'm going to unmute your or send a request to mute your microphone in just a moment. Request has been sent.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, I'm Susan Bonilla, the CEO for the California Pharmacists Association. Yes, we did submit a letter expressing support for the work of the subcommittee and appreciate the focus on reducing medication errors. We do want to at least register with the full board that we do have concerns about picking one single entity for this reporting. We understand the desire for aggregate information and think that a couple suggestions just based on the conversation that we've had here is I think the real effort here is to standardize the data that we need. I don't know that that means we have to only have one PSO actually collecting that data. We do think that with some of our independent pharmacies, there will be a lot of barriers and hurdles for them. We want to see the highest level of compliance. And so we think making this as accessible and as easy for pharmacies should be a top priority. And that if there is a uniform data report, that could be the avenue for really getting that aggregate data that you are seeking. We also think that if there is a interest in only using one, that perhaps some kind of RFP process should maybe be used so that really all the information and the best possible solutions and methods for collecting this data could be fully understood by the board. I also just second that, yes, putting one particular entity into statute is, I think, problematic, as we can't always see down the road 3, 5, 10 years and what that could mean. So I understand language can be worked on as it goes on, but we do just want to support the work of making sure these medication errors are reported in a way that we're going to increase patient safety. But at the same time, we really want to see high compliance, and we do have concerns about some of the independent pharmacies' ability to be able to adapt to only one potential reporting method. And many of them do use other PSOs currently, and we would like to see that those options be considered as this goes forward with discussion. Thank you so much.
This is the moderator. Next individual identified as Mark Johnson. I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone. Request has been sent.
Thank you, board. This is Mark Johnston. I represent CVS Health today. I find it curious that the board is considering this statute change without ever receiving a presentation from a PSO, which board members have requested of the board staff, including again today. Thus, any decision today appears to be very premature. Even board counsel has admitted today that this effort has not been completely vetted. I also find it curious that the board is rushing to approve this draft bill when the very impactful topic of pharmacists practicing from outside of a pharmacy is not even agendized today. 42 states require some sort of CQI program, including California, although some states limit the requirement to certain programs such as shared services or compounding. While states vary in the detail contained within their CQI law, some states recognize PSOs as compliant with their law, such as in Virginia, New Jersey, and New Hampshire. These states have recognized and trusted the importance of data that is submitted to a federally protected PSO. However, no state requires that all pharmacies submit their data to a PSO. As an alternative to this proposal, for example, California could be the first state to require that all pharmacies submit data to a PSO and thus be a national leader. Additionally, I find it curious that the cost to the state of California and its licensees has not been disclosed, and thus I am awaiting what the controversial fiscal statement will reveal, which certainly will be a topic of debate at the legislature. I also find it interesting that the legislature asked the board to create a committee to consider just culture, and the committee has heard so many great presentations supporting just culture, but this punitive board has chosen to codify their ability to discipline for errors within this draft language. I urge you to vote against this motion and send this effort back to committee, as this effort needs more work prior to attempting to find a sponsor for this bill. Thank you.
This is the moderator. Next individual, Ed Howard. I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good morning, board members. Ed Howard, counsel and lobbyist on behalf of UFCW, in strong support of this proposal moving forward to be considered by the legislature. But really, the question before the board is not whether every single word in this proposal should be enacted at this phase. Really, the only question before the board is whether or not the conversation that you're having about the implementation of mandatory reporting should continue this year or wait for a whole nother year. The deadline for submitting bill requests to Legislative Council is January 20th. February 17th is the last day to introduce bills for this year, and your next meeting isn't until February 6th. As a practical matter, the job of finding authors for bills is happening right now. That's pretty much the rest of my day. This proposal is, when it comes to simply a very brief proposal with a few sentences, commemorating the fact that the board believes that there should be some sort of mandatory reporting for medical errors, is patently consistent with the board's patient protection mission. This conversation, we think, should continue. And we enthusiastically support the legislature considering such a proposal. By way of example, we don't have a particular position yet on whether it should be 1 or 2 or the ISMP identified in the bill. We think the conversation is worthwhile to continue. By the way, on the preemption question, I haven't looked at it myself, but you should take some solace in the fact that Pennsylvania has a program as well and has not been ruled to be preempted. Anyway, with that, thank you for your time, and we look forward to talking about this important patient protection issue with you during the course of the legislative year.
This is the moderator. Next individual identified as Stephen Gray. Stephen, I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone in just a moment. Request has been sent.
Thank you again for allowing me to offer some comments. I believe that we've heard a lot of discussion that it should be one entity where the data can be aggregated. I believe that the motion should be amended to specify that the board can select the entity and also the reporting data and even the definition of an error, which various organizations have different definitions of the error that they submit to a PSO. But that can all be done in regulation. If the motion was changed now to specify that the board can select it, the PSO via a regulation, and that passes, the board can start right away working on regulatory language to get out the detail, rather than waiting until the end of the legislative session, which won't be until August or September, and delay it even further. So if it goes through now, I believe that the legislation will receive a lot of opposition as written. The other thing I'd like to comment on is the Board of Pharmacy has experience with putting a specific entity in statutory language and then having to go back to the legislature to remove that language. And this was all about Joint Commission regarding sterile compounding deemed status. Further, I believe that the presentation we had today about the value of ISMP and their findings and their communication could be picked up by the board by requiring pharmacies to actually subscribe to ISMP. Many outpatient pharmacies do not subscribe to ISMP. However, most, as Board Member Serpa said, most hospital pharmacies or hospital organizations do. So the ISMP data is very valuable, and maybe that is a method that you could go and also amend the language to make it two provisions, one to subscribe to ISMP and the other to have the Board of Pharmacy pick. I believe that CPHA has made a good point that if you pick something, it has to go through a bid process, because I believe you should ask IMP if they charge Pennsylvania for the exclusive or special process that Pennsylvania uses. I believe you'll find out that they have to cover their costs and charge for that. Thank you very much.
This is the moderator. Next, I have John Grubbs. John, I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone in just a moment.
I'm the Chief Pharmacy Officer for University of California Health. I'm speaking on behalf of our 5 University of California medical centers and the pharmacy departments. Our hospitals operate a number of community pharmacies in addition to the hospital pharmacies. And our hospitals are required to have a state-mandated medication error reduction plan. And as part of that plan, we are required to have a system or process to identify potential and or actual medication errors and to analyze those through a multidisciplinary process with the objective to identify opportunities to change current procedures and systems to reduce medication errors. And these requirements apply to both our hospital pharmacies as well as our retail pharmacies. And I'll also point out, as part of this process, we're required to look at external medication error related alerts to modify current processes or systems. And so ISMP is one of the sources for us of those external alerts. You know, we're concerned, I guess. I mean, we think this is great, and we really applaud the efforts of the committee and the board to reduce medication errors and improve safety for our patients. And that's something that we've been focused on in our facilities for many, many years. We're just concerned that this might be a duplication of effort for us. We understand that our data from our community pharmacies should be included in this database, but again, we're concerned that it's going to be a duplication of effort for us, and we're wondering if there is another approach that could be taken for community pharmacies that are located within a CDPH licensed facility like ours. Thank you for the time.
This is the moderator. Next individual, Lindsay Gullhorn. I apologize if I'm missing the last name. I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. Good morning. This is Lindsay Gullhorn with the California Retailers Association and National Association of Chain Drugstores. First, just want to say that I agree that I think it'd be highly beneficial for the board to hear a presentation from a PSO at a future committee meeting, since this is such a complex topic. So we're happy to hear that the board will look into that. Also want to align myself with some of the prior comments from CPHA and CVS. Very much appreciate ISMP's presentation today and the incredible work that they are doing in this space in acute care settings. But we do ask that if the board decides to require community pharmacies to report medication errors to a third party, that It'll allow pharmacies to report more broadly to PSOs, particularly PSOs that work with community pharmacies. PSOs that work with community pharmacies specifically assist pharmacies study medication errors and implement corrective action in order to improve patient care and prevent errors in the future. And this has been proven to be an effective practice for years. PSOs are not a government program, and reporting by pharmacies currently is voluntary under the Federal Patient Safety Act. So requiring pharmacies to report to a single PSO and require the reporting and disclosure of aggregate data could contradict the act, because certain information, not all of it, but certain information, namely actions taken by the pharmacy after the error, are protected under the act. So we think that allowing pharmacies to be compliant with this proposal, still requiring medication error reporting, but be compliant on the condition that they are reporting to a PSO would be a comprehensive way to ensure necessary information is reported, including those actions taken by pharmacies after the error. The Virginia Board of Pharmacy actually has taken a similar approach, which has been successfully implemented. So that is one potential option for the board to examine. Again, definitely appreciate the board's consideration of this proposal to require medication error reporting. Think it'd be great for the board to hear a presentation before moving forward. But if this does move to the legislature today, we look forward to engaging in that process as well. Thank you.
This is the moderator. Next, individual identified as Rodney Palomiri. Again, I apologize if I mispronounced last name there. I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone. I sent another request. I see 2 logins with the same name, so I sent another request, but to the other login. Rodney, I see that you're unmuted.
Are you there? Are you there? Are you there? Are you there? Okay.
Give me just a moment. Leave your microphone unmuted. I'm going to remove the second login, which I think is causing the echoing. So give me just a moment and try it again.
Okay. How are we doing?
Perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. This is Rod Palmieri. My history, I'm a licensed pharmacist for 54 years. 30 of those I spent with the California Health Department under all their various names and organizations. And during that time, I did a lot of legislation and regulation. With legislation, it's like making sausage. No one really wants to know how it's done. But generally speaking, I think legislation should be designed to give the board more flexibility. I agreed with one of the previous commenters that once you put it in legislation, it's difficult, if not impossible, to change it. So if giving the board the ability to select the entity that they wish to have the reporting go to would be, in my opinion, the best way to go. Anyway, thank you very much for the opportunity to comment, and I've enjoyed my 54 years as a licensed pharmacist. Thank you.
This is the moderator. There are no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature? Or actually, sorry, someone just raised their hand. I'm going to send a request to unmute their microphone, calling user 4.
Hi, good afternoon. Peggy Benzer from the Alliance for Quality Improvement and Patient Safety. We would, again, be delighted to come before the board and give a broader presentation on patient safety organizations. I think that it could be helpful to get an overview of the PSO community and what they do. I would believe that the majority of the pharmacies in California are members of a PSO, as well as those that are connected with a hospital, affiliated with a hospital, or even in hospitals. The 8 PSOs that are listed, there's actually many more that are operating in California, and so I'd really love to update your information. Also, in ISMP's presentation, they were proposing to collect information, analyze it, and provide information back to the pharmacies. And that's exactly what PSOs do. So there could be a lot of duplication of effort. And so, we might want to think about the proposal in a just culture mindset. I also want to align myself with some of the previous comments, particularly about independent pharmacies, that, they have limited resources, limited funds, and I'd be really afraid that the independent pharmacies would necessarily need to leave their current PSO, who is collecting information and focusing on their problems and improvement of their problems. And so it may not be in the best interest of California consumers to have this large body aggregating data rather than a really very focused approach. So those are just some of my thoughts at this time, and I'd love to work with the board to make sure that there's no unintended consequences with this proposal. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and again, I would love to work with you and give a presentation at a later date.
This is the moderator. And just a friendly reminder to members of the public, if you would like to participate, type in comment in the text field and send it to all panelists. So give just a moment to any individual if they wish to submit a request to make a public comment.
This meeting is being recorded. And to perhaps change where it says to the Institute of Safe Medical Practices, but say to an entity or whatever the correct legal term is instead of entity, approved by the board. I think that would help to postpone some of the discussions that we have for regulation, but it also brings up the point that Dr. Gray did about it's probably not a good idea to list a specific organization. We've been there, done that, and it's hard to undo. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Great point. Jessie.
Thank you. Completely agree with what Maria just said. I think changing the language, keeping it more open-ended will allow us to continue this discussion, and I think would help remove some of the concerns that people had with this. A couple other notes. I also think it's a good idea to consider requiring all pharmacies to subscribe to the ISMP alerts. I don't know if that necessarily has to be now, but maybe that's a discussion for the Med-Air committee meeting. And then finally, I just want to remind everyone that ISMP Canada's mandatory reporting was specific to community pharmacies. So they do have the experience in community pharmacies.
Thank you so much, Jessie. And yeah, let's definitely bring the recommendation around having everyone subscribe to the committee. Were there any other comments from board members? All right, so I'm a little unsure on this process because this was technically a committee recommendation, but you all have recommended making a change to it. So can someone walk me through the
Nicole,
process?
I'm gonna take over here. So we're gonna vote on this, and I'm not recommending, but I think the sentiment may be that we vote no on the committee recommendation, and someone can make a new motion, and then that will require a second on that motion, and then another public comment. So we're gonna just go for the vote, and then I mean you can vote yes as well, but probably just in light of trying to push forward and have more consensus, maybe best that we vote down this committee recommendation and then make a new motion. So I'm going to call for the vote. Maria?
No.
Thank you, Maria. Jake?
No.
Thank you, Jake. Renee?
No.
Thank you, Indira.
No.
Thank you, Trevor.
No.
Thank you, Jesse.
No.
Thank you, Jose.
No.
Thank you, KK.
Nope.
Thank you, Kula.
No.
Thank you, Nicole.
No.
Thank you, Jason. I'm sure you will abstain, but Jason?
You're going to hear this a few times from me today. To avoid any appearance of a conflict of interest, I'm going to abstain. Thanks, Sung.
Thank you, Jason. And I vote no, so the committee motion fails. And so, Maria, I know you had some, although, by the way, I'm going to add this, and I'm not trying to throw a wrench at this, and I should have thought this through. For some reason, I just, in my head, community pharmacy would also kind of make maybe tricky, but I'm just thinking specialty pharmacy as well as mail order pharmacy. I don't know where they would fit. So I'm sorry, I'm not trying to create ruckus, but I just, for some reason, didn't think of that until now. So it's my fault, but just wanted to get everyone's thoughts on that. And are we exclusive limited? Since we're adjusting the motion, this probably is an opportunity to probably broaden that possibly, as specialty pharmacy really should be included as well in some fashion, in my opinion, as they deal with very highly sensitive medication. But anyway, Maria, go ahead. If you want to try to make a
Well, I
motion.
do want to just add to your comment there, and maybe Eileen or Ann can reply. My understanding is community pharmacy would be the PHY license category, which would include all of those also. If that's
That was my thought process as well, Maria. Yeah, but then I'm like
I
questioning.
think that's the legal definition, Eileen or Ann.
Hi, this is Eileen. Trying to find the statute, but I think that would be the case. The hospital pharmacies have got a different thing, but maybe Ann has got a better knowledge about the exact breakdown of the licenses.
Yeah, I think what you're intending is anything that's given in the outpatient setting, right? Anything that is, dispensed to the patient, kind of. So yeah, the retail
could
system.
change the community to an outpatient pharmacy. Would that be?
Let me look at the self-assessment form and just confirm what we call it on the self-assessment form. That's probably the term that people are most familiar with. If you want to continue, and I can provide you with that language when I have it.
Okay. While we're doing that, any other member comments? I know we talked a lot, so in the respective time, any new information anyone want to share? Okay. So
as Ann's looking that up, I think the only thing that I would, since this is statutory, we could amend it or change it later. I mean, it's not like this is the actual thing that will actually be forced to go through legislature. We have an opportunity to make amendments later. My only comment would be that we stick to the legal definitions and license categories, because if we have to have another definition of do I qualify and do I not qualify, it'd be very difficult. So to me, it seems it's much easier to say if you have a PHY license, you qualify, and the other license categories do not. But that's just me.
okay, well, that should be as included in the motion as an intention so that we don't try to make it too complicated. But if you could just state that in the motion, Maria, maybe that, so that we know the intent of your, what's your comment, and hopefully we'll see where the vote falls on that. Maria, do you want to make a motion. I'm gonna
But this
put you on the
time, my
spot there.
motion is really about the report all errors to an entity approved by the Board of Pharmacy or approved by the board. And the word entity is kind of a placeholder. As determined, I would give authority to the EO and the president under asking for legal opinion is what is the correct legal term. Entity may not be the right term, but that's the kind of a placeholder. That's my motion.
Could I just clarify? So, Maria, would it be consistent with recommending or pursuing a statutory proposal consistent with the language on the slide? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Could you go back to that? Thank you very much. Confirming that community pharmacy shall include any pharmacy with a PHY prefix and replacing Institute for Safe Medication Practices with an entity approved by the board.
Yes.
Thank you.
Give me 1 second. I'm more than happy to second, but
I'll second. This
thank
is
you,
Jessie.
Jesse. Okay, Nicole, I'm gonna hand it back to you for public comment. Sorry, go ahead.
Great.
Didn't mean to like
Thank you.
hijack there.
Great, thank you. Moderator, can you please open the line for public comment?
Yes, this is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions will be on the screen shortly. If you would like to participate, thank you. The instructions are on the screen. Please click on the question mark inside of the square, type comment in the text field that appears, and send it to all panelists. You can also raise your hand by hovering your cursor mouse over your name on the participants panel and clicking on the outline of a hand that appears. If you're calling in and if you would like to raise your hand, press *3 to raise your hand. And I do have 2 requests for public comment. We'll first go with Suzanne Bonilla. I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone in just a moment. Request has been sent.
Hello, I would just suggest that the words third party entity be inserted. Entity could imply that it would be the board or a governmental agency, just to continue the purpose of this being reported outside of the enforcement process. Third party entity might clarify that a little bit. Thank you very much.
Next individual identified as Ed Howard. I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone.
Good morning, Ed Howard again with UFCW in support of the revised motion. Thank you so much.
No further requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you. All right, Maria.
I just wanted to clarify that I do speak in support of the current motion, and the discussion whether it's a third party or what type of entity could be done in regulation.
Thank you, Maria. Any other board member comments? Seeing none, President O, I turn it over to you for the vote.
Thank you, Chair Tebow. Maria, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Do we need to clarify motion? Anyone needs clarification? Just want to make sure. Okay, I think we're good to go. Jake, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Jake. Renee?
Yes.
Thank you, Indira.
Yes.
Thank you, Indira. Trevor?
Yes.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yes.
Thank you, Jose.
Yes.
Thank you, KK.
Yes.
Thank you, Kula.
Yes.
Thank you, Kula. Nicole.
Yes.
Thank you, Jason.
Abstain.
Thank you, Jason. And I vote yes, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate this, and I will turn it back to you, Nicole.
Great. Sorry, can I request a quick break before we go on to the next one? Because it might be just as long.
Absolutely. Yes, and this is taking a little longer than I thought. So we'll be back in 5 minutes, 11:30.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, that was a really quick break, so some may not be back, but I'm gonna start trying to take a roll call. Maria? Maria's not back. Jake? Jake is not back. Renee? Renee, not yet. Indira? Yeah, Trevor?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Trevor. Jesse? Jesse not back yet. Jose? I see you, Jose.
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you, Jose. KK? I see you. Kula's back. Kula, hi. Nicole's back already. Hi, Nicole. And Jason?
I'm here.
Thank you, Jason. And I'm going to go back to Maria. Maria? Jake? Renee?
Here I am.
Hi, Renee.
Hello.
India? Jesse, are you back?
Hi, Sung, I'm here.
Hi, Jesse. And then KK, are you back?
Yes, I'm back. Thank you.
Hi, KK. Thank you. Indira, I see you. You're
I'm
back.
here. I'm back. Sorry.
Hi, Indira. No worries. Maria?
I'm here.
Hi, Maria. And Jake?
I'm here.
All right, Nicole, back to you.
Great, thank you so much. So now we're going to move on to agenda item 6, which is the discussion and consideration of statutory proposal related to working conditions. Members, many of the issues and challenges in California are not unique. As such, the committee has also considered enforcement authority exercised by other jurisdictions related to workplace conditions to learn about different approaches. Our committee has previously learned that in Nova Scotia, legal provisions require that pharmacy managers ensure the staffing plan of the pharmacy is commensurate with the needs of the patients of the pharmacy. Further, when staffing issues are related to errors, the board can require the pharmacy owners and managers to show proof of how they ensured that regulatory requirement has been met. There are several other jurisdictions within the U.S. that are evaluating working conditions, including some establishing requirements to report unsafe working conditions. Others have provisions to ensure sufficient personnel are scheduled to work, and some have notification requirements requiring a pharmacy to notify patients if the pharmacy is experiencing significant delays or cannot dispense prescriptions in a timely manner. In California, there are provisions establishing what can occur when a pharmacist is at lunch and requirements for a community chain pharmacy to ensure designated staff are available to assist a pharmacist when requested. Most recently, there is a new requirement establishing a prohibition on workload quotas. Including in the meeting materials are specific legal requirements for several other states, which were reviewed and considered by the committee. Several states include a requirement for pharmacy to ensure sufficient staffing. As part of the committee's September meeting, members spoke in support of the authorities from other jurisdictions, including the provisions in Oklahoma. Members also liked provisions that limited the number of working hours for pharmacists, but noted that could be a challenge to implement because of variances in practice settings. Members also considered the concept of establishing a staffing floor and considered who within a pharmacy should have the authority to establish appropriate staffing. Most recently in November, the committee considered proposed statutory language developed following the September meeting. After consideration, the committee is recommending that the board pursue a statutory proposal. A summary of the various provisions is detailed in the meeting materials. I believe it is important to remind members and the public that similar to the prior agenda item, this proposal is being recommended to address contributing factors to medication errors, which, as I previously stated, is a significant consumer protection issue. Committee members, before I open it up for others for discussion, I wanted to see if there are any additional information from the meeting that you would like to highlight. Okay, seeing none. Members of the full board, do you have any questions or comments on the committee's recommendations? Okay, there's our hands. I knew we were going to get some. Maria. I think you're muted.
I'm sorry, I paused long enough. I thought that others would go first because I would not like to go first.
Well, we love hearing from you.
I don't want to drive the discussion, so I think I can wait.
Okay, I'll come back to you then. Trevor.
I just wanted to speak in support of the recommendations. These proposed statutory changes seem very common sense about making sure that our pharmacies and pharmacists aren't overworked and provide the best amount of service to consumers and to their patients. So when it comes to just the basic need to make sure that our pharmacists are covered by, our pharmacies are staffed, not only physically staffed, but mentally staffed by folks who are able to handle the workload and not be distracted, and making sure they're providing the level of care they need to in order to make sure that they're taking care of the consumer. Each of these proposals seems very just common sense, and I look forward to supporting them.
Thank you so much, Trevor. I really appreciate your comment about mentally staffed. That is a great way to put it. Maria, do you feel ready now?
Okay. I really appreciate the detail that went into the proposal and the various parts of the current statute that are going to be addressed. I commend the staff and the committee on being so complete in reviewing the different sections, because we could have easily just done one section and not looked at the entire picture. My comments are about BPC 4113.5, section F. So I don't know if you have a slide with that. Probably not, but oh, thank you. Section F. And it's about the pharmacy is always staffed, and emphasizing always staffed, with at least one clerk or pharmacy technician fully dedicated to performing the pharmacy related activities, and then it goes on. So I have two comments on that. The first one is I'm really concerned. I was concerned before I read the letters, but even more after I read our letters and some of the public testimony I'm sure we're going to get, is about the impact to patient access and pharmacy care if this were enacted at this time. I think that this may be a lofty goal to look forward to. But the reason I bring that up is because of there are challenges that we've had in this area too, on the opposite side, of where we had pharmacists who are working alone and are not having adequate support. And so we have a current regulation, 1714.3, which is rather new and has not been utilized very well. Either we haven't publicized it enough, or pharmacists don't feel comfortable enough to file complaints or to file information for investigation. But for the newer members of the board, that regulation requires pharmacies to have a second person in the store who is available to the pharmacy within 5 minutes, and that person be assigned and designated. We know that's not happening. And because it's not happening doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to enforce it better or educate better on that, rather than jumping to the giant leap of having a second person always in the pharmacy. I think that will cause 24-hour pharmacies to close and rural pharmacies to potentially have limited hours and essentially limit access to patients. That's my first comment. The second comment was, if we decide to go down this path, I think it needs to be clarified that it be very similar to earlier. This would be only when the pharmacy is open to the public. And so that there can be a pharmacist working after hours in the pharmacy doing billing or even doing filling of prescriptions after hours, but only if we go down this path, which I hope we don't, that it be only when open to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. That's a really good point. I definitely appreciate your point about having it be open to the public. That's a really good point. And I know that there's probably some things in here that we didn't think of that, you know, we're going to come out of this conversation. The one thing I will say, as I was reading those letters too, I became a little bit concerned about some of this. And then I thought about it opposite. So what happens? So are we saying that there's absolutely no contingency plan on staffing in these places? What happens when a pharmacist is sick? If requiring there to be one other person is going to completely shut down pharmacies and change everything, does that mean that we're not allowing pharmacists to ever call up sick, or we're having to close? Does this mean that when your one technician gets COVID and has to be out for 10 days, you are leaving the pharmacist completely alone for 10 days? I think the implications of this, when you look at it from the opposite side, in part show why this might be necessary, or some work needs to be done in this area, because it implies that, you know, when a tech quits, we're just leaving that a pharmacist alone forever, and we're shutting down pharmacies every time a pharmacist calls out. And I know we're hearing from pharmacists that they're concerned that they can't even call out, that they kind of get pressured to come in when they are sick and shouldn't be there, and these sort of things. So I think there has to be, we have to be looking at it kind of from both sides. Sorry, that was kind of a rant, but thank you. Sung, I think you were next with your hand raised. And I think you're muted.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, after all these, still forget to click that button. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Nicole. Maria, great comment. And that was my initial thought as well when we actually brought this proposal to the committee. And the reason why we did push this forward is because we are under the assumption that this text of this F would be implying the intent to the legislatures where we want to go. And that understanding was that the language will not be exactly, because it's already duplicative and somewhat confusing to what is already currently under language A, that is current law. So the idea would be that if the legislatures hear what our intent is, that the Leg Council would be able to propose a more of a balance, and it could just be simply as striking out a sentence under A. But again, I don't want to get to the details of that right now. So I absolutely agree with you. Those are concerns. But I think that can be easily resolved by amending it to just after our legislative intent and the hope is conveyed to the legislators. Few other comments. I do believe this is a very good consensus. It's not extreme, and I think it's very balanced from considering what has happened and has happening for the last many years. And we do need a solution. We can't really keep putting down and pretend that the problem doesn't exist. I think this is quite obvious that there is a problem, and we really need to be the leader. We are actually behind California compared to other states, and so it's a very urgent issue, and we need to, you know, hope that California would have the highest standards, and that pharmacists, patients would know that pharmacists are really able to take time and be able to take care of their medication needs. So ultimately, I think that the comments you made, Maria, I think we are, you know, definitely aware of those concerns. And I think we could easily figure out a way to move forward. And I think that I would be amenable to creating an exemption to 24-hour pharmacies and some other ways so that we could balance those concerns you address about rural pharmacies or the pharmacies, you know, that have to close in emergencies or urgencies. And Nicole's comment are true as well, that, you know, I myself, you know, am very scared to get sick, because sometimes if I don't show up, pharmacy will close. So we have to have some balance, and I think there's definitely a way for us to process this forward and figure out a way to make this work for us.
Great. Thank you, President. Oh, I really appreciate the comments about this kind of being to give the intent of what we're looking for, even if it won't be the exact language. It's a great reminder. Jessie.
Thank you. I agree with Maria's comment about how there should be clarification on the language, just to make sure that we're saying the pharmacist can't be alone when the pharmacy is open to the public, because there are several pharmacies in which a pharmacist may go in early to get ahead of work. Just a note on the pharmacists working alone, and we know that unfortunately a lot of pharmacists don't actually have someone who's properly trained when they are working alone, or people don't show up. And just to kind of add to that, because we know that's not already happening, this means that pharmacists aren't taking their break. Like, in addition to their lunch breaks, they're also allowed to have 10-minute breaks, which isn't happening if they're working alone. So that's just one note. I do think there needs to be some sort of clarification, because F does contradict A. So I think there needs to be more clarification as to this replacing A as we move forward with it. And then the last comment I had was in regards to the next proposal with Business and Profession Codes 4113 under bullet point C. I think it was in the letter from CPHA that they had recommended changing the language from the pharmacist in charge having autonomy to staffing to just the pharmacist on duty. And I think I actually do support that amendment for the reasons that we kind of discussed in the committee, where there may be situations in which a pharmacist in charge is the owner of a pharmacy and has a financial incentive to understaff, or say you're at a retail chain, you may get a higher bonus if you're, quote, under budget. And that also just gives more flexibility for a pharmacist who may be a floating pharmacist, and maybe you have more experience in higher volume stores, but you don't have as much experience working with less staff and multitasking. There's just different levels of experience in staffing and support that an individual pharmacist might need. So I would support potentially amending pharmacist in charge to pharmacist on duty.
Thank you, Jessie. That's a great experience that you bring and point out in this situation. KK.
Hello, good afternoon. Good morning, sorry. I have a similar point to what member Maria Serpa shared earlier, that we have to consider the access to the pharmacies in the market. As we already know, that a lot of chain stores have closed the pharmacies. A lot of pharmacies have gone from 24 hours to non-24 hour pharmacies, and also from 10 p.m. or a midnight closing to 8 or 9 p.m. closing. So access is already in a particular zip code. The number of hours one can access pharmacy has already gone down across the board. So we have to be mindful of that. And then second thing is that if for XYZ reason, if pharmacy is closed, then we need to have some kind of a robust mechanism in place for pharmacies to notify the consumer as well as prescribers, and also the system that continuously allow you to put in electronic prescription, voicemails, also electronic refills, because a lot of people are taking bus, public transportation, asking somebody for a ride or whatnot to go and take and pick up those prescriptions. And if for any reason these pharmacies are closed at a pharmacist or PIC's discretion, then that voicemail or anything that identifies the operating hours should be robust enough to notify in real time that at this hour, 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. onwards, this pharmacy is closed for the day. So consumer has some access to the information when access to the pharmacy is restricted for the day or two or whatever. So thank you.
Thank you, KK. Yeah, those are really good points. although I don't know that even at present there's a restriction to leaving voicemails or sending electronic prescriptions outside of hours. So I don't know exactly how that piece would work, but a really good point about making sure there's a way to notify the consumers. Renee, I think you had a comment.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, I mean, of course, this is very complicated as it's been acknowledged, but I am concerned when there's a pharmacist who is, not getting breaks, as was mentioned by Jessica, not getting breaks, not getting food. I think many of us could attest to the busy pharmacies, but that increases the risk of medication errors. So while having access to a pharmacy is definitely very important, is having access to a pharmacy with a higher risk of having a medication error from a lone pharmacist, is that really what we want to do? So I would agree, yes, we want to keep them open, but at what cost? Are we keeping them open? And absolutely there's issues with finding any pharmacy staff right now, but we also always have to remember that somebody has to really be engaged, hydrated, fed. Multitasking in itself is a hazard, even though it's a very commonplace activity in a pharmacy. But I think that's been shown too, that's not actually that effective. You should just be one at a time, so to speak. It's a conundrum, I know, but I still think that if we are trying to protect the public from, for their safety, then, at some point that lone pharmacist with no breaks and is a risk to the public. That's what I just wanted to say.
Thank you, Renee. And one of the things that we talked about in this that I'll point out too is, closure being the most extreme, but that there's probably steps in between that a pharmacy can take. Maybe you aren't able to offer the vaccines that day. Maybe you just have to focus on the prescriptions that are the waiters, and you're not doing the ones that the people are gonna come pick up tomorrow. So we felt that there were steps that could be taken. It's not just you're open and it's too busy or you're closed. We figured that there's an array of steps that happen in between that process. But that giving that option of closure is when it's probably not going to be utilized super often, but that it is there in those cases when it's really gone sideways and needs to be available. Great. Jesse, did you have another question or no? And leftover hand. Trevor.
Yes, I just wanted to second and amplify what Renee said, especially as we're talking about pharmacies cutting back hours or losing 24-hour pharmacies, especially as we operate in an environment of scarcity as it comes to the pharmaceutical profession. If we're not protecting the pharmacists and giving them the ability to take care of themselves, we're going to be closing. Pharmacies are going to be getting closed just in another way. And not only will it be getting closed and both affecting customers and patients and consumers, but it's my belief it'll be harmful, even more harmful to the consumers and even more harmful to the physicians themselves. And so what Renee was saying, obviously this is not a cut and dry case. If we were operating in an environment of abundance when it came to pharmacists, maybe it would be a different conversation. But we need to protect the health of our pharmacists and of our consumers. And while, again, not cut and dry, it definitely seems that this is the way forward to make sure that while it's not perfect, it may cut back hours, but it won't cut back hours as much if all of our pharmacists are burnt out, mentally unable to do their job, or out sick themselves. And so that's why I appreciate the work the committee did on this and why I'll be supporting it.
Great. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Trevor. You're right. a quantity versus quality issue at a certain point, and we need to maintain a certain level of quality. We can't let it all go just to keep things open. So that's a really good point. Jig, I think you had a comment.
Yes. I'm not going to repeat some of the things that were already mentioned, but one of the things that Nicole, you mentioned that, there are lots of steps that can be taken before shutting down a place. And I think spelling out limiting services for the day or something like that would be important in the language, so that not only it gives them authority to cut down services, like you mentioned, vaccinations, or even, just refill prescription. They can say, I will only fill acute prescriptions and, anything that's absolutely needed, emergency prescriptions. Before they decide that they would shut down, because, and I'm thinking of extremely rural areas where there could be only one pharmacy. I'm thinking about emergency situations, any natural hazard, fires, severe weather, and a pandemic. There are so many different rules around. There was this most recent one where also something that you mentioned, somebody has to be out for 10 days, and it pulls the entire staff out, and in urban area, it's not an issue. Somebody can drive a mile and take care of their prescription. But in California, being so widespread, and we have so many rural areas, that there could become a real problem of access. So that language should be changed to the steps taken, or some of the services could be discontinued for the day before. So we should give some guidelines to pharmacists, and then not just say close.
Great, thanks, Chig. That's a really good point, and I think that's part of what we could hopefully get to, in the regulatory process, and like President O was mentioning earlier, we just want to make sure we get our intent across, and then we can get into some of those details. But I definitely agree, there's a lot of details we want to make sure we get into in here. I also think about the times that we hear about pharmacists having their own health emergency and not being able to leave and having terrible worse outcomes because of that. And those are the sort of situations we definitely want to make sure we avoid. Jesse, I know it's for real this time.
Thank you. Sorry, I know I keep leaving my hand up. So just as an example, to give someone an example of like a situation in which someone would maybe close the pharmacy. I know we've talked about like working conditions. Obviously, if there's a fire or something like that, that's a health hazard for all of the employees in the pharmacy, and they should be able to close. I will just give a personal testimony. In 2020, during the protests after the murder of George Floyd, as I'm sure many people know, there were several pharmacies that were broken into very frequently during that time. And I was a PIC at the time in a situation where there were protests happening immediately outside my store. And even though I wanted to close and I was covering for a staff pharmacist who didn't want to work, I was forced to keep the store open, to the point where when I actually left the store, they were boarding up and I had to run home. So I just want to give people an idea of like the sort of circumstances that would allow pharmacists to close in scenarios like that. And I also do want to just get some feedback on what other board members think about having the pharmacist on duty have the autonomy to do scheduling. Just as an example, if you're a floater pharmacist or a staff pharmacist and maybe it gets really busy, you may want to ask a technician to stay late if they're able to. And I worry that having the language specific to the pharmacist in charge would mean that you'd have to go through the process of reaching out to them and getting approval, when in that moment you could, use your critical thinking and make that decision right there, then and there, as long as they're able to stay. So I just wanted to get some more feedback on that, because I would hope to make that amendment in this proposal.
Great, thank you, Jesse. Yeah, that's a really good point, because you won't always have the pharmacist in charge available. We had the same problem during the protests where we're right in the middle of Hollywood and all our staff were going to be trapped. So we had to close the pharmacy early to allow our staff, one, most of them wanted to join the protest, but two, to be able to get out, or they were going to be stuck in it at work almost essentially overnight. So yes, absolutely. These situations definitely happen where you have to be able to make a choice, and sometimes very quickly. Maria, I think you had another comment?
Yeah, that's really always great to hear other people's comments. I think a couple of times I've heard people comment about the intent versus what the written proposal or the written suggestion for statutory language is. And I'm very concerned about that process. I think strategically it's better for us to actually state exactly what we want and maybe put some intent in our conversation. But the risk of approving something that we don't necessarily agree to, but just have a starting place, is an interesting discussion for the board. The other, you know, because we do have many times that we can still amend it and talk about it. It's going to take. We have several meetings where this will come up, so I understand that there's always a possibility to change that. But one of the things that does concern me about starting too far down the road and saying we can always scale back is the confusion and the misinformation that sends out to the public and to the legislatures, because you will potentially have people who will agree and be supportive of this legislation who will have to come out as opposed or argumentative or have issues because of the degree that it's going. And if we're saying that the board doesn't necessarily agree to that degree, then perhaps we shouldn't have gone that far in the beginning and saying we're going to scale back. I think there's a balance kind of there, but part of the the statutory process is you want to have as many people support the process and support the information and not have a lot of negative language, because from a legislative point of view, we all know is legislators don't want to deal with controversy. So if we have a controversial subject, the potential is that it will go nowhere. So that's my comment about that. And then Jesse made a comment about the pharmacist in charge and the pharmacist, and I appreciate that. I had never thought about that because in my environment, we have that happen also in acute care. Is the pharmacist should have the authority to authorize overtime. The pharmacist in charge, pharmacist there should also have the authority to send people home early. And sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes it's a supervisor or a PIC that does that. And so I do appreciate that it should be the person who is in the area and responsible for the duties. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Maria. Yeah, I think a lot of the concern is making sure that we address the what we're hearing from the pharmacists, and I think that's where a lot of this came out to the feedback that we're hearing from the pharmacists and how much they're struggling and wanting to make sure that we do enough to address it, knowing that it might get watered down in the process, and we want to make sure we come out with something that still feels strong and supportive to those pharmacists to make sure their conditions are such that it's safe for the patients. President O. Oh, did you not have a comment?
Sorry, I forgot to mute again. So
Okay.
Thank you everyone for the comments again, and just wanted to respond on the pharmacist in charge piece. I think we probably should leave that there and add a statement, something along, but again, I don't want to get bogged down to details. Just my thoughts. The reason why pharmacists in charge should have autonomy is the idea is that this will hopefully encourage more planned scheduling better, more so than emergency situations. So pharmacists in charge are legally strictly held liable for the operations of pharmacy. And so we're just trying to make sure that also includes the pharmacy to be able to function properly in their judgment, so that I would hope that pharmacists in charge would make those decisions. And that's why this language serves to try to add additional layers of power for them to decide on that and give more autonomy. So I would be supporting pharmacists in charge should have the autonomy, and in cases where pharmacist is on duty, should also have that power as well if pharmacist in charge is not available or is not there. I would not, I'm not sure if it just should be pharmacists on duty because that's too dynamic. I think that just causes a lot of, that's too last minute only oriented, I think. Thinking, I'm hoping that we could have more planned, better operations should be the ultimate goal, I feel, of this proposal.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that this was intentioned at pharmacies where the scheduling happens outside of the authority of the pharmacist in charge. I think that's what that was getting to. Jig.
I'm sorry, that was an error.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And then Maria, your hand is still up. Did you have anything else or?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of, I guess, repeat about the current regulation 1714.3. I think we have a huge opportunity to make that more understood and available for people to file complaints. I went to the board's website and it was it's not on the first page, maybe even a phone line or something. I know it's not exactly this topic, but it's the same issue that could assist.
Great. Thank you, Maria. I don't see any other board member hands at this time. Anybody else? Okay. With committee's recommendation serving as a motion, moderator, please open the lines for public comment. As the moderator does so, I want to ensure members that we received copies of the written comments received by several organizations, including the letter from the California Retailers Association and National Association of Chain Drugstores dated December 12th, the letter from UFCW, Western States Council, dated December 12th. As I stated prior to the stated during the prior agenda item, the letter from UFCW includes comments related to this agenda item as well. And we also received the letter from the California Pharmacists Association yesterday evening. Thank you.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. Members of the public who are logged in, if you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square, typically located bottom right corner of your WebEx screen, and type comment in the text field that appears, and make sure that goes out to all panelists before hitting the send button. You can also raise your hand by hovering your cursor mouse over your name in the participants panel and clicking on the outline of a hand that pops up. For those who are calling in, you can raise your virtual hand by pressing *3 from your phone. So I have a few requests through the Q&A system and raised hands, so we will be going through those in order as they came in. So Lindsay Gula, I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone. Give me just a moment as I locate your microphone, and you've been unmuted.
Great, thank you. Hi again. This is Lindsay Goldhorn with the California Retailers Association and National Association of Chain Drugstores. Appreciate this discussion on this proposal and thank the Medication Error Reduction and Workforce Ad Hoc Committee for their work on this and for being able to engage in committee on this. And while we definitely understand the goal to ensure adequate staffing at community pharmacies, as has been discussed, we really do think this will have significant and detrimental consequences for patient access to pharmacy services. And as drafted right now, doesn't take into account circumstances that are outside of a pharmacy's control. Again, as discussed, if a technician calls in sick, for example, the pharmacy would have to close, or at least as written, it would have to close, leaving patients without access to their medications. And I totally understand some of the comments I've heard from board members regarding leaving pharmacists alone if a technician calls in sick. But right now, as drafted, this doesn't give a pharmacy really any room to find a replacement. They would just have to close, or at least that's my understanding of it. Same would be true if a clerk or a technician quits until the pharmacy is able to hire a replacement. And again, as discussed, and appreciate the discussion on this, this would be really problematic for pharmacies in rural areas where it's already difficult to attract pharmacy employees and where pharmacies really are a critical healthcare access point for patients, oftentimes the main access point. In addition, this allows a pharmacist to close a pharmacy if the pharmacist feels that staffing is insufficient to fill prescriptions or provide other services to patients. And again, we think, as written, this will have an enormous negative impact on patient safety. Again, what if the pharmacy is in a rural area and a patient has driven a long distance to pick up a necessary medication at the pharmacy, only to get there and find that the pharmacy is closed? What if a patient needs an emergency medication and that medication is at one of those pharmacies that has closed? So beyond pharmacy closures, at best temporary and at worst permanent, we think this proposal would very likely result in a reduction of pharmacy hours. Pharmacy hours have already been reduced in many California pharmacies. If this is enacted, 24-hour pharmacies will likely significantly diminish. Weekend operations could cease. Instead of opening early and remaining open to the public late into the evening, daily operating hours could shrink. So we're hopeful at a minimum that there could be some consideration for these issues. Last thing, in addition to those components, this proposal prohibits pharmacies from implementing requirements to fill prescriptions within a certain amount of time, unless required by law. We think this is duplicative given that the legislature enacted SB 362 in 2020, which prohibits chain pharmacies from establishing quotas. So we think it'll put significant constraints on the ability of pharmacies to ensure patients.
This is the moderator. Time ran out. Now the next individual identified as Mark Johnson, I'm going to submit a request to unmute your microphone.
Mark Johnston with CVS Health. CVS Health is opposed to this draft bill. Closing a pharmacy without notice is a much larger public safety concern than what you are attempting to solve for today. Obviously, a patient experiencing a medical emergency who arrives at a closed pharmacy is an example of this proposal negatively affecting public safety. You've heard me express numerous times that a key component of public safety that is often overlooked by boards is access to care and adherence to medication regimens. Imagine a rural pharmacy where a patient makes their monthly trip to the pharmacy just to find it closed. Imagine a Medi-Cal patient who rides the bus to a pharmacy to find it closed. Imagine a disabled patient arriving at the pharmacy to find it closed. In all of these hypothetical situations, the patient is unlikely to return before their medication regimen is uninterrupted, or potentially patients of a closed pharmacy flood to a nearby pharmacy that is not staffed for this influx. So does that pharmacist choose to close too? Allowing a pharmacist to close a pharmacy because a tech called in sick is bad for public safety. Allowing a pharmacist to close a pharmacy because they arbitrarily determine that staffing is inadequate is bad for public safety. I urge you to send this back to committee for further consideration and not send this controversial bill to the legislature for debate over whether the Board of Pharmacy is running a bill that is good or bad for public safety. You have heard me express numerous times that the administrative burden that California has imposed through legislation and regulation will cause pharmacies to cease to operate in California. Such permanent closures are no longer a potential outcome of administrative burden. They are reality. CVS Health is in the middle of closing 900 unprofitable pharmacies across America, as well as numerous quorum sterile compounding pharmacies. With more than 10% of CVS pharmacies located in California, this is impactful to your residents. Each year, CVS reduces hours and reopen to the public, including eliminating overnight shifts and shortening weekend opening and closing hours, due in part to administrative burden. If you add the administrative burden of a tech or a licensed personnel working each slow hour that a pharmacy is open, these hours may disappear. This means more pharmacy closures, less 24-hour pharmacies, and reduced weekend and shouldering hours, resulting in less hours for pharmacists to work. This impact to access to care and thus public safety needs to be considered when running a bill that doesn't even have the same exemption that is currently found in 4113.5. And I'll quote, "The board shall not take action against a pharmacy for a violation of the section if both of the following apply. Another employee is unavailable to assist the pharmacist due to reasonably unanticipated circumstances, including but not limited to illness, injury, family emergency, or the employee's termination or resignation." None of this is in your bill, but it is in the quote unquote no pharmacist left alone statute. Again, I urge you to send this controversial bill back to committee.
Microphone has been muted. Time was up. Next individual identified as Sarah Miles, UFCW. I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone. Request has been sent.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Miles with UFCW. As documented by your materials, as reinforced by what we hear from our anguished pharmacists and pharmacy tech members every day, inadequate pharmacy staffing in chain stores is an urgent patient protection matter, warranting this board's urgent leadership and a legislative discussion not in some distant time, but for this year. For this reason, UFCW strongly supports the legislative proposals regarding staffing before you today, mindful of the fact that the proposals are simply an invitation to the legislature discussing these critical issues under this board's leadership. Thank you.
And we have two more requests through the Q&A. Just a friendly reminder to members of the public, if you would like to participate, type the word comment in the text field that appears, and we will unmute your microphone for you to make the comments. Any full comments submitted through the Q&A system will be dismissed. So Suzanne Bonija, I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone as soon as I locate it. Request has been sent.
Thank you. This is Susan Bonilla, CEO of the California Pharmacist Association. I'd just like to start by saying that CPHA fully supports the autonomy being provided to the pharmacist on duty to determine adequate staffing levels. This will allow them to honor their oath as a pharmacist to provide patient care services safely without any fear of retaliation. This measure that you've been discussing, and we really appreciate the work of the committee and also the board and their attention to rectifying what has become an untenable situation for many pharmacists in California with their workplace conditions. And we feel this direction is complementary to the work we've done with SB 362 to eliminate pharmacy quotas. And this is an important next step to allow pharmacists to be able to discharge their duties as it pertains to their oath. Also, I would just say that there could be perhaps lessons learned from the administration of independent pharmacies who do not seem to run into these same issues because they anticipate, because they communicate, because they have plans in place for these different contingencies. So I believe there are solutions that some of the comments that make it seem like the sky is falling really are not the way it has to go. I think we have good examples from our independent pharmacy realm that demonstrates that there are other ways to run pharmacies to ensure that those disabled patients will be served, deliveries will be made, they will be taken care of. So I think we need to really look at how this measure can drive better planning, better practices, and ultimately better patient safety and patient care, because that is the focus. Thank you so much.
Next individual identified as Stephen Gray. Stephen, I'm going to send a request to unmute your microphone. Request has been sent.
Thank you again for the opportunity to comment. I agree with many of the statements. I want to point out a little history for those that are new on the board. The bill that required no pharmacist to be left alone, which is the 4113.5, was actually enacted several years ago, and it actually was open to a lot of controversy. And in fact, the board had to adopt a couple of years later a regulation to try to clarify that, but it is still a major problem with different interpretations. This was even clarified by a co-sponsor of the bill, a pharmacist, Senator Jeff Stone, when he came to testify at the board that what was intended by 4113.5 was not being followed. I believe that this bill has very good language that clarifies that intent about the staff being available at all times, meaning that they're scheduled. Yes, there's going to be problems when they leave, but at least the business plan should be called for them to be scheduled. Having said that, also a problem was that the people that were sent to help the pharmacy were not qualified. And so the bill should be modified to say that it has to be a qualified clerk. The bill talks about a phone message. Not all pharmacies in California even have an outgoing phone message, nor do they even have, some of them don't even have a phone number that can be directly accessed to the pharmacy by patients and the consumers. If that's your intent, that they have such a phone, that needs to be clarified also. It talks about lunch breaks. The law really talks about meal breaks. A lot of the problems with pharmacists that are having these stressful situations are after hours, weekends, and holidays, and even the 24-hour pharmacies. They are entitled to a meal break also and rest periods. I believe that the allegation that a lot of pharmacies will close, especially such pharmacies in rural areas, et cetera, is overstated. A lot of pharmacies have trouble competing because there are 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 pharmacies maybe within a quarter mile each other, in some cases 3 on the same intersection. So they have adopted a business plan which tries to keep them in business by having short staffing and other situations that are causing the problem. So I would be leery of claims, and maybe there could be some language in there to address certain common situations, et cetera. I also want to call again to the attention to the board and the board members, especially the public members. There already is a labor code, 850 to 856, that limits the hours of work and the days of the week that pharmacists can have employees. It needs to be modified so that the Board of Pharmacy can enforce that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
This is the moderator checking for any further requests that may have come in the last seconds here. No further requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate all the discussion around this and all the great comments. Board members, I know we've got some. Jesse, you were the fastest. Take us away.
Thank you, Nicole. I guess this is for everyone, but just kind of reflecting on Sung's comment about the PIC being able to plan ahead of time. And I know the intention was so that the actual pharmacist could determine staffing. In terms of adding an additional sentence, could we add something that said if a pharmacist is in charge is unavailable, a pharmacist on duty may adjust staffing according to workload if needed? How do people feel about that? Could we add something similar?
What is everyone's thoughts?
I would be support to that, but just because we have a committee recommendation, again, gets tricky with how we proceed. So we might just have to vote on this and then kind of try to amend it to your liking. And I don't know if we all have some full consensus anyway. So I'm gonna probably go ahead and we can call for the vote and then go from there. I don't know where we're gonna land.
Sure. Did any other board members have comments before we go for the vote? Okay, seeing none, President, now I turn it over to you.
Thank you. This is just purely for the committee recommendation. And so we're gonna go with Maria.
Yes.
Thank you, Maria. Jake?
Yes.
Thank you, Jake. Renee?
Yes.
Thank you, Renee. Indira?
Yes.
Thank you, Indira. Trevor?
Yes.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yes.
Thank you, Jose.
Yes.
Thank you, KK.
Yes.
Thank you, Kula.
Yes.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yes.
Thank you, Jason. Abstain, I'm sure, but go ahead. Thank you, Jason. And I vote yes, the committee motion passes. But Jesse, your comments, I'm not sure how we would address it. And can you assist on this, or Eileen? I'm sorry to bring in the council just so that maybe we could have additional motion if you feel like we could add another comment on that. I'm not sure where we would go for the process-wise. Please assist.
Hi, President O. This is Eileen Smiley. We already have a motion passed. I think there are processes that you could do when you're trying to get a sponsor to talk about the other changes and maybe shifting it. If you wanted to make it crystal clear, you could also add for another motion maybe to amend that. But then I think we could also handle that in the communications with whoever the sponsor is that we try to obtain for the statutory proposal.
Okay, I think the challenge though is that when that happens, Eileen, I'm not sure where the board is on that answer. So I'm trying to get an answer on, is the board agreeable to adding that sentiment about a pharmacist being able to make the determination? So how do we resolve that? Can we get a vote on it, or can we make a motion?
Should I make an emotion to make that amendment and then see where we land, I guess?
Just point of order. I don't know if this is appropriate because Eileen wasn't previous council. In the past, we've done straw votes just to see when we were in person, and on Zoom, that might be helpful, but I'm not sure if that is legally appropriate, what Eileen's interpretation is.
Sorry, just as I said before, this is Eileen Smiley, sorry, Board Council. Because this is a statutory proposal that will be going to the legislature, I don't know whether you necessarily need a, secondary motion. If you want to do a straw vote, like what Maria said, instead of raising your hands, obviously in a WebEx meeting, you'd have to get some type of, recorded votes from the members about whether or not they would support us, with that type of change. If you want to be crystal clear, you can also have a motion to amend what that language is as secondary, just to say the pick, if the pick is unavailable.
Jessie, does that make sense? Do you want to try to make that motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion just because I'd rather see where everyone lands before we would bring that to legislation and make sure that everyone on the board actually agrees with it. So I'll make the motion to add the language of, if a pharmacist in charge is unavailable, a pharmacist on duty may adjust staffing according to workload if needed.
This is Nicole. I'll second.
Thank you, Nicole. Jessie and Nicole, and then any other member comments before we are going to go for public comment on that motion? Okay, moderator.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click the question mark inside of the square, type comment in the text field that appears, and make sure you send it to all panelists before clicking the send button. You can raise your hand by hovering your cursor mouse over your name in the participant panel and clicking on the outline of a hand that appears. For those calling in, *3 from your phone will raise your virtual hand. I see no request for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you. And I'm going to go for the vote. Maria, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Maria. Jake?
Yes.
Thank you, Jake. Renee?
Yes.
Thank you, Indira.
Yes.
Thank you, Trevor.
Yes.
Thank you, Jessie.
Yes.
Thank you, Jose.
Yes.
Thank you, KK.
Yes.
Thank you, Kula.
Yes.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yes.
Thank you, Jason.
Abstain.
Thank you, Jason. And I vote yes, the motion passes. Great. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you so much, everyone, for enduring through this discussion. It was a great discussion, and I know that it's always tough to bring consensus, but I feel like we landed somewhere, which is great. So thank you, everyone, for enduring through this discussion. And I'm sorry that this is taking so long. It is 12:30. We still have one more item, fee audit, and then we also have to break for lunch, and then we have 2 petitioners. So we probably can only take about half an hour lunch. So we can break for lunch now and come back around 1, if that's agreeable, and then we'll get back on it. I'm sorry for the short lunch, but we have to take a lunch for labor reasons as well. So if that's okay, we'll be back at 1. And I think, Jig, you have to leave at 1:30, so we're going to just say bye to you here. And everyone else, we'll see you back at 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock. Enjoy your lunch.
Thanks, everyone.